Timeless Assassin by author, Raj_Shah_7152. Chapter 176-200. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. By the ruins of Draconia, Multhorax POV. By the time Multharic finally returned to Draconia, the once mighty dragon homeworld no longer existed. Where entire continents, volcanoes, dragon cities, and ancient mountain ranges once stood proudly across the heavens, there now remained nothing except endless floating debris and rapidly cooling fragments of shattered planetary rock. As for several long moments, Multharic simply stood there silently, soaking in the destruction of his home. Whoever is responsible for this, must pay for this in blood, he thought, as the rage burning inside his chest grew heavier and heavier with every passing second. Because this was not merely the destruction of territory. This was humiliation, the complete annihilation of the dragon race's birthplace. And yet, before Multharic could even properly process the overwhelming fury building inside him, his instinct suddenly locked onto another presence standing calmly amidst the drifting debris nearby. Who? Multharic wondered, as he found the deceiver standing casually atop a floating piece of broken planetary rock while the endless remains of Draconia drifted around him. You, Multharic growled while murderous pressure exploded outward from his body. Did you do this, you piece of shit? You dare destroy my home world? Multharic questioned while his aura distorted the surrounding space violently. Meanwhile, Morris merely looked toward him calmly before breaking into low laughter. Ha 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 ha. Before you waste your time attempting to hunt me down personally, Dragon King, you should probably understand the situation you currently find yourself trapped within. Morris explained while casually gesturing toward the destroyed remains of Draconia surrounding them. You see, the gods who accompanied me here today have already moved toward several other dragon territories by now. At this very moment, they are simply waiting for my command to continue destroying more dragon worlds. Morris said as Multhorac's expression darkened instantly. You see, there is a limitation to gods that not even you can overcome through brute strength alone. Which is the limitation of how many places you can be at once, as not even you can be everywhere at once. Morris continued while smiling faintly. There are 4 of us. And only 1 of you. Which means that the moment you chase after any one of us directly, the remaining 3 can quietly continue exterminating your race planet by planet behind your back. A dangerous calm lingered behind Morris's voice while he continued outlining the reality of the situation further. So I strongly suggest that you think very carefully regarding your next move, Dragon King. Because if you don't, Morris slowly looked around at the shattered remains of Draconia drifting through the void. Then this may very well become the end of dragon civilization as you currently know it. Morris warned as for perhaps the very first time since obtaining his new body, Multharic genuinely felt pressured while standing before another opponent. This rascal, he's serious. Multharic thought, as he realized that Morris had completely intellectually cornered him here, leaving him outmaneuvered and without any viable counter options left, as that feeling alone infuriated him more than the destruction of Draconia itself. What do you want? Multharic questioned eventually while suppressing the overwhelming urge to rip Morris apart where he stood. As Morris smiled wider hearing those words. What do I want? I want a favor, Dragon King. Morris replied while stepping lightly across the floating debris beneath his feet. One fight. One battle against one opponent of my choosing. He explained while Multhorac's eyes narrowed sharply. I'll name the time. I'll name the place. And when that day comes, all you need to do is arrive carrying those lovely dragon teeth weapons of yours forged from origin metal. Morris continued while amusement flickered within his eyes. In exchange, I'll sign a binding soul contract acknowledging dragon dominion over half the universe. And guarantee that neither myself nor my allies will interfere with any dragon-controlled territory afterward. Morris offered as Multharic fell silent briefly. Deep within himself, every instinct screamed at him not to trust the deceiver. Every part of him wanted to kill Morris immediately and gamble everything on war instead. And yet, he also understood something extremely clearly now. If he rejected this negotiation outright, then over the coming weeks, the combined gods could slowly erase dragon civilization world by world until nothing remained except himself. As for the first time in many years, Multharic found himself lacking the confidence to simply fight his way out of the problem directly. Which opponent do you want me to fight? Multharic questioned eventually while already suspecting the answer might involve Leo Skyshard somehow. However, Morris merely shrugged lightly in response. I haven't decided yet, Morris admitted casually while smiling madly. They call me the deceiver for a reason, Dragon King. My loyalties are never fixed permanently. His smile widened further afterward. Today, they may align beside the great clans. Tomorrow, perhaps beside someone else entirely. Or perhaps beside nobody at all. Morris explained while slowly stepping closer toward Multheric. In the end, which battle I eventually ask you to fight is not your concern. All I require from you is one fight. One day. On one battlefield of my choosing. Morris pressured as Multheric remained silent for several long moments afterward. Until eventually, the Dragon King slowly exhaled through clenched teeth before nodding reluctantly. Fine. Multheric muttered while murderous fury still burned visibly within his eyes. But understand something clearly, deceiver. His gaze sharpened terrifyingly. This agreement does not mean the Dragon King has forgiven what you did here today. Multheric declared while glancing toward the shattered remains of Draconia surrounding them once more. You and I became eternal enemies from this moment onward. And whether I have to wait 1 century or 2. A dangerous pressure gradually leaked from his body again. I will eventually claim vengeance for my people, by chopping off your head. Multheric promised as Morris simply smiled calmly in response, because deep within himself, the deceiver already understood that the moment Multheric accepted this agreement, he would never again get the chance to raise a weapon against him again, for Multherac's death would be the first one that Morris would ensure in the final battle. Planet Mequana, a few days later, Leo's POV. A few days following the destruction of Draconia, Leo personally traveled toward planet Mequana after receiving a direct invitation from Multheric himself. Ordinarily, Leo no longer bothered leaving the Eternal Garden frequently anymore, as over the past several years, he had gradually grown accustomed to remaining within the divine realm peacefully while allowing the cult's vast machinery to operate independently without requiring his constant presence everywhere. However, Multheric was different. The Dragon King was not merely another political figure within the universe. He was Leo's former instructor, and a current cult ally. One of the very few individuals Leo genuinely respected despite understanding fully well that someday, the two of them would most likely stand opposite one another on a battlefield. And so, despite knowing that this meeting would likely involve uncomfortable truths, Leo still chose to answer the summons anyway. Planet Mequana itself looked vastly different compared to Draconia, as while Draconia embodied chaos, barbarism, volcanic fire, and primal violence endlessly, Mequana felt far quieter and significantly more disciplined. Massive black fortresses stretched across the planet's rocky terrain while gigantic dragons rested silently upon mountain ranges overlooking military camps below. As unlike the drunken atmosphere common within the Dragon Court, the mood throughout Mequana felt unusually grim. Clearly, the destruction of Draconia affected the dragon race far more deeply than most outsiders currently realized. As upon arrival, Leo was respectfully escorted toward the central fortress atop the planet, where Multheric himself waited seated upon a massive stone throne overlooking the barren horizon outside. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then eventually, Leo slowly stepped forward before breaking the silence himself. My condolences regarding what happened to Draconia. It was a bold move from the Alliance gods to target the dragon capital directly like that. Leo muttered as instantly, Multherac's expression darkened while his fingers tightened visibly against the armrest of his throne. Don't remind me of that incident, boy. It was perhaps the single most humiliating moment of my entire life. Multheric admitted as despite the calmness in his voice, the rage hidden beneath those words remained impossible to miss. Leo nodded quietly hearing that response while keeping his expression completely neutral. Because truthfully speaking, he understood exactly why Multheric felt this way. For someone as proud as the Dragon King, failing to protect his own home world while being manipulated strategically by weaker opponents was likely a wound far deeper than any physical injury. Eventually, Multheric slowly rose from his throne before stepping toward Leo directly until the two stood face to face. His golden eyes locked onto Leo's gray ones silently for several moments before he finally spoke again. I called you here today because I wanted to look you in the eyes properly like a dragon before telling you something unpleasant. Multheric began as Leo simply stared back at him calmly without any visible reaction. The bastard Morris cornered me and forced me into signing a binding agreement in exchange for sparing the remaining dragon worlds. Multheric explained while frustration flickered visibly within his eyes. He threatened to continue wiping out dragon territories one after another while the other gods spread themselves across different battlefields simultaneously. If I chased one enemy, the others would destroy 3 more worlds somewhere else. Multheric clenched his fists tightly while the surrounding atmosphere grew heavier unconsciously. You know me well enough by now to understand that I'm not someone who bends easily beneath intimidation. Ordinarily, I would rather die fighting than submit to threats from cowards hiding behind schemes. His gaze sharpened further. However, in that moment, I genuinely saw no alternative. Multheric admitted as Leo remained completely silent while listening carefully. The agreement states that someday, when Morris decides the time has come, I must fight one battle for him against one opponent of his choosing. He'll choose the battlefield. He'll choose the day. And when that moment arrives, I'll have no option except honoring the agreement. Multheric continued while his eyes remained fixed upon Leo steadily. And deep within myself, I have a strong suspicion that the opponent he eventually intends for me to face will be you. Multheric concluded as for several long moments, silence settled between the two of them completely. However, surprisingly enough, Leo did not appear particularly disturbed hearing those words. Instead, a faint smile slowly appeared across his face while he nodded calmly. I understand, Leo replied as his voice remained level and even. And if that unfortunate day truly comes someday, then I suggest you don't hold back against me in the slightest. His gray eyes sharpened subtly. Because I certainly won't, Leo stated confidently as hearing that answer, Multheric suddenly let out a low chuckle. I know you won't, Multheric muttered while shaking his head lightly. However, if you genuinely believe that your current self can defeat me, then you're gravely underestimating exactly what kind of monster I am, boy. A dangerous pressure slowly leaked from Multheric's body naturally while ancient killing intent flickered behind his golden eyes. Perhaps you managed to kill Caliph successfully. Perhaps you can already threaten ordinary gods despite still remaining within the demigod realm. Multheric continued while stepping even closer toward Leo now. But understand something clearly. His voice lowered slightly. I outlived Caliph's father himself. I survived eras long before your cult even existed. Maybe someday, once you become a true god yourself, you might genuinely possess the ability to challenge me properly. A faint grin slowly spread across his face. But as a demigod, you still stand far beneath me, Multheric declared confidently while patting Leo firmly against the shoulder. And yet surprisingly enough, Leo offered absolutely no argument toward those words whatsoever. Instead, he simply bowed his head slightly. If there's nothing else you wished to discuss today, Dragon King, then I'll take my leave. Leo said as Multheric quietly gestured toward the fortress exit casually. You may leave if you wish. Multheric replied as Leo immediately turned around before calmly beginning to walk away. However, just as Leo reached the edge of the hall, Multheric suddenly spoke once more. I hope you win, boy. Or at the very least, I hope you manage to kill the others involved in that future battle before facing me. Multheric admitted as Leo's footsteps paused briefly. Because truthfully speaking, I would rather battle only you for the supremacy of the universe than spend another century dealing with those cowardly schemers hiding behind politics and manipulation endlessly. Multheric muttered while genuine irritation surfaced across his face once more. For one brief moment, Leo stood there silently with his back facing the Dragon King. As though debating internally whether those words deserved a response at all. Then eventually, without saying anything further whatsoever, Leo simply continued walking toward the exit quietly before disappearing beyond the fortress hall. As in his mind, there were no more words left to be said to the Dragon King anymore. Multheric was a great warrior for sure, however, he was not a great ruler. His arrogance and over-reliance on his own power was the reason Draconia had fallen, and he was too blind to still see his flaws. You're the best general one could have, but you are not king. Leo muttered while leaving Mequana, as in his mind he already understood that the next time he saw Multheric, it would be on a battlefield. 1 year later, the Cult of Ascension. For nearly an entire year following Leo's visit to planet Mequana, the universe entered what appeared to be a strangely peaceful phase, as no major wars erupted openly between the dominant powers while the cult continued expanding and consolidating its territory steadily. The dragons stopped pushing deeper into Great Clan territory, and in return the Great Clans also stopped attempting any large-scale counter-offensives, as the peace deal that Morris made held strong. To ordinary citizens scattered throughout the Rainbow Stream, it genuinely looked as though the universe had finally entered a period of relative stability once again. However, that appearance of peace was nothing more than a facade, because although the universe looked peaceful outwardly, countless hidden developments quietly unfolded behind closed doors. And more often than not, most of them were being planned by one man, the deceiver Morris. Meanwhile, within House Skyshard itself, perhaps the single most important development during this period came through Caleb. Because during one of his recent military campaigns upon a newly conquered frontier world, Caleb unexpectedly fell deeply in love with a young woman belonging to a respected local family. And surprisingly enough, unlike his usual cold and duty-driven personality while operating as a commander, Caleb genuinely seemed happy while spending time beside her. Eventually, after properly receiving the blessings of both families involved, the two officially married during a small private ceremony held within the Eternal Garden itself. Only close friends and family attended the occasion, with Leo, Amanda, Myron, Luke, Alia, Leonardo, Dumpy and the girls' parents being the only ones present, while Multheric, Morris and the other gods secretly sent treasures as wedding gifts to congratulate the eldest Skyshard child upon his marriage. For several weeks, the atmosphere surrounding the Eternal Garden remained unusually warm and peaceful while celebrations quietly continued between the families involved. And perhaps for the very first time in many years, Leo genuinely felt like House Skyshard was finally becoming a proper family once more instead of merely a collection of powerful warriors constantly preparing for war. Meanwhile, Caleb himself appeared happier than anyone had seen him in a very long time. The endless stress of commanding armies, conquering worlds, managing logistics, and handling politics finally seemed lighter upon his shoulders whenever his wife stood beside him. Which was precisely why nobody noticed the danger approaching until it was already far too late. Several months later, Caleb's POV. Late one evening, following an exhausting day filled with commander duties, military reports, and administrative meetings, Caleb finally returned toward his private residence expecting nothing more than a peaceful night beside his wife. However, the moment he stepped inside his bedroom, his instincts immediately screamed that something was wrong, because although the room seemed largely undisturbed, there was a faint trail of mana going outward from his bedroom window, while his wife was not in bed. Was someone here? Caleb wondered, as his eyes narrowed sharply while his gaze swept across the chamber, as despite the complete lack of visible signs of struggle, a terrible feeling immediately settled within his chest. Then finally, his gaze landed upon a single folded letter resting calmly atop the bed. The moment Caleb picked it up and began reading its contents, his expression darkened instantly. I have kidnapped your wife in a way that your father's shadows and the security surrounding House Skyshard remain completely unaware of. If you wish to see her alive again, leave this planet immediately without informing your father or any member of his shadow network. Meet Lord Morris alone within the void of space at the following coordinates: 11.11.15.255.11.16.11.11. The clock is already ticking. We are watching. If you fail to arrive alone within 2 hours, your wife dies. Signed, Terrence. For several long moments, Caleb simply stood there silently while tightly gripping the letter between his fingers. Because deep within himself, he already understood exactly what this meant. This was a trap, a deliberate one, and yet despite understanding that fact perfectly, he also understood something else. He had absolutely no choice except walking directly into it anyway. Clench. Caleb slowly closed his eyes while crushing the letter tightly inside his palm. Damn it, he muttered quietly while frustration and self-hatred surged violently within his chest. Because at that moment, he could not stop blaming himself for what happened. He was supposed to be smarter than this. And yet somehow, despite all the shadows surrounding House Skyshard constantly, despite all the security precautions established around his family, Terrence still managed to abduct his wife without anyone noticing anything at all, as that realization alone made Caleb feel sick to his core. How the hell did I allow this to happen? He questioned himself bitterly while staring toward the empty room around him. For years now, he spent most of his life commanding armies successfully while crushing countless enemies through strategy and discipline. And yet now, the one person he genuinely cared about beyond military duty had been taken from directly beneath his nose. This is not the time to think about that. First I must go and save Sophia. Caleb thought, as without hesitation, he immediately turned before leaping straight through the bedroom window, in a way where nobody would be able to track that he had left. Within minutes, Caleb reached one of the merchant hangars positioned near the outskirts of the district before stealing a small merchant transport vessel, as he left the atmosphere to head towards the provided coordinates at once. FSSSHHH. The engines ignited quietly while the ship slowly lifted into the skies, as throughout the entire journey toward the coordinates, only one thought endlessly repeated itself inside Caleb's mind. What the hell does the deceiver want? Does he want me to betray my father? Does he want to take me captive? Am I making the right choice here by going to meet him alone? Will I make it back alive? As although he had impulsively decided to go save his wife at once, he did not feel assured on whether or not he even had the ability to save her on his own or not. Deep space coordinates, Caleb's POV. Once Caleb finally reached the designated coordinates deep within the empty void of space, he immediately began scanning the surrounding area carefully from inside the merchant vessel's cockpit. However, despite extending the radar range to its maximum limit, he still failed to detect even the slightest trace of another ship anywhere nearby, as the endless darkness surrounding him remained completely silent and undisturbed. Is this some sort of a joke? Where the hell are you? Caleb muttered as his heartbeat gradually grew heavier inside his chest, because the deeper he drifted into the isolated region of space, the stronger his instincts warned him that coming here alone may have been one of the worst decisions he had ever made in his entire life. And yet, before Caleb could even properly process the growing danger surrounding him, something suddenly landed directly atop the cockpit glass above his head, violently enough to shake the entire vessel slightly. Thud. Startled immediately, Caleb instinctively looked upward, only for his pupils to constrict sharply the moment he saw Morris crouching directly above him while staring down through the glass with a wide unsettling grin spread across his face, as the deceiver pressed his face disturbingly close against the cockpit window while continuing to maintain direct eye contact without blinking even once. For several long moments, neither of them moved at all, as Morris simply continued staring downward through the glass like a complete lunatic while Caleb stared back upward coldly from inside the cockpit without allowing even the slightest panic to appear across his face. Then suddenly, without warning, Morris vanished completely from above the ship. And before Caleb could even turn around fully. Ha 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 ha. Hee hee hee. Ha 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 ha. A laughing sound boomed from behind him, as Morris appeared behind him, and began to stroll around casually inside the cockpit. You really came here alone without informing your father. Honestly speaking, I genuinely expected Leo Skyshard to be hiding nearby somewhere with those lovely origin daggers already prepared to cut my head off the moment I appeared before you. Morris began as amusement flickered endlessly within his black eyes. But despite understanding exactly who I am, despite understanding that this entire situation could very obviously be a trap, you still came here anyway. That means you truly must love your wife deeply, because from a strategic perspective, what you just did is unbelievably stupid. Morris explained as Caleb quietly continued staring toward him without replying, while deep within himself, he already understood that every word leaving the deceiver's mouth right now was deliberately designed to provoke an emotional reaction out of him. However, unfortunately for Morris, Caleb inherited Leo's temperament far more than most people realized, as he remained completely indifferent to the taunts. You know, I could kill you here right now without much difficulty whatsoever. And honestly speaking, part of me is genuinely curious regarding how your father would react once he discovers his precious golden child floating dead somewhere within the void of space. Morris muttered while slowly walking around the cockpit casually, as though the vessel belonged to him instead. Because unlike your brother, you were always the one he secretly placed the highest expectations upon. The responsible child, the intelligent one, the future leader. Morris continued while smiling faintly. So watching all that disappear in a single moment honestly sounds rather entertaining. Morris remarked as Caleb's expression remained completely unchanged. Meanwhile inside his mind, only one thought continued repeating endlessly. Sophia. As long as Morris still needed something from him, there was still a possibility that she remained alive. Which meant that losing control emotionally here would accomplish absolutely nothing useful. Loving someone too deeply can become a weakness, you know. And honestly speaking, I've never truly understood why people grow so attached toward spouses in the first place. Morris continued while glancing lazily toward the endless darkness outside the cockpit window. You are a monarch-ranked warrior currently walking the path toward becoming a demigod eventually. Meanwhile your wife, she's a master-tier mortal, who will soon grow old and die. Perhaps she reaches Grandmaster someday if she trains diligently enough. Perhaps even transcendent if she's particularly talented. Morris shrugged lightly while grinning. But eventually she dies regardless. A century. Maybe two if she's fortunate. And despite understanding that reality perfectly clearly, you still willingly walked into the territory of someone capable of killing you instantly just for her sake. Morris muttered as though he genuinely could not comprehend Caleb's thought process whatsoever. As finally, after remaining silent for so long, Caleb opened his mouth. Where is she? Where is my wife? Caleb questioned calmly while staring directly toward Morris without blinking. For a brief moment, the deceiver simply smiled. Then suddenly, his grin widened further. Just your wife? Or wife carrying your child? Morris questioned as instantly, Caleb's expression froze completely. For perhaps the very first time since arriving here, genuine shock finally surfaced visibly across his face. In the moment Morris noticed that reaction. Ha 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 ha. Oh, so you genuinely didn't know. Morris laughed wildly while clutching his stomach dramatically. That's absolutely incredible. Your wife herself probably discovered it only recently then. Morris muttered while Caleb's thoughts momentarily descended into complete chaos. Pregnant. Sophia was pregnant. For several long moments, Caleb genuinely struggled to process the information properly, because the realization struck him so suddenly that even his normally calm mind failed to reorganize itself immediately. However, unfortunately for him, Morris clearly understood exactly what effect those words carried. Because now, this negotiation possessed significantly higher stakes than before. And both of them understood it clearly. "What do you want from me, deceiver?" Caleb questioned eventually while his fist slowly tightened beside him unconsciously. As hearing those words, Morris's expression gradually shifted into something significantly colder and more serious than before. "It's less about what I want from you personally," Morris began while slowly stepping closer toward Caleb again, "and more about what I need you to become eventually," he explained as Caleb's eyes narrowed sharply. "You see, your father built something extremely interesting with the Cult of Ascension. Originally, I viewed the organization merely as another temporary power rising within the universe before eventually collapsing like countless others throughout history." Morris continued while casually placing one hand against the cockpit wall beside himself. "However now the cult has become something far more important than that." A dangerous smile slowly spread across his face. "And once I eventually take control over this universe completely, absorbing the cult beneath my authority naturally becomes one of my highest priorities," Morris explained as Caleb's gaze gradually darkened. "However, unfortunately, the cult's people possess extremely strong loyalty toward the cult's core beliefs and towards your father himself. They won't willingly bow toward me. Nor would they ever willingly follow one of my own direct subordinates." Morris continued while slowly raising one finger toward Caleb directly. "Which leaves me with only one viable option remaining. A puppet leader." His smile widened further. "And lucky for you, I've already chosen exactly who that puppet leader will become," Morris concluded as Caleb immediately clenched his fists harder while murderous intent slowly leaked from his body unconsciously. "You want me to betray my father?" Caleb questioned coldly as Morris immediately shook his head lightly. "No, that would be far too simple," Morris replied while chuckling softly. "You see, betrayal only works properly when the victim understands what's happening too late to avoid it. And your father is far too intelligent for something as straightforward as ordinary betrayal," Morris explained while his pale eyes gradually sharpened. "What I need from you is something significantly more poetic," he continued while Caleb silently listened. "Soon, at a time of my choosing, events will unfold in a way that forces you into making certain decisions naturally. You won't believe yourself to be betraying your father. In fact, you'll genuinely believe you're trying to help him," Morris muttered while amusement flickered visibly across his face once more. "And yet despite all that, your actions will still eventually place the dagger directly against his throat regardless," Morris explained as Caleb's expression finally darkened completely. "You're insane," Caleb muttered quietly while Morris immediately burst into laughter again. "Ha ha ha ha. Of course I am. You don't become feared across the entire universe while remaining sane," Morris replied as Caleb continued glaring toward him coldly. "But understand this clearly, young Skyshard. The moment you decided to come here alone, was the moment I had already won," Morris declared before turning away to leave, as he snapped his fingers, and out of nowhere, an unconscious Sophia appeared inside the cockpit. Thud. She landed on the floor without any visible injuries on her body, as Morris exhaled a long breath and said, "She doesn't know that she was kidnapped. You may choose to tell her about it or not. The choice is yours, young Skyshard. If I were you, I'd take better care of her going forward." The next day, the Eternal Garden, Leo's POV. The next day, while Leo sat peacefully upon the cliffs of the Eternal Garden overlooking the serene ocean below, Shadow Number 1 quietly approached him from behind carrying a sealed report within his hands, as the unusually grim expression visible across the Shadow's face immediately made Leo realize that something unpleasant had happened once again. For several moments, Shadow Number 1 remained silent while extending the report toward Leo respectfully, as even without opening it yet, Leo could already sense that whatever information rested inside had deeply disturbed the man standing before him. "What happened, What is it this time?" Leo muttered while finally accepting the report calmly, as Shadow Number 1 lowered his head slightly before replying. "My lord, the report contains a message from the deceiver Morris," Shadow Number 1 informed as Leo's eyes narrowed faintly hearing those words. Without wasting another second, he immediately opened the report and pulled out the contents resting within. However, the moment Leo saw what rested inside the envelope, his expression immediately stiffened slightly, because instead of finding some elaborate written threat or negotiation proposal from the deceiver, there was only a single photograph placed quietly within the report, as the image showed Morris standing casually beside Caleb somewhere deep within the void of space. For several moments, Leo simply stared silently toward the image while countless thoughts immediately began surfacing inside his mind one after another. Because what disturbed him most was not the photograph itself, but rather the fact that Caleb never informed him that such a meeting had even taken place. And that alone immediately felt wrong. Because throughout all these years, Caleb had always informed him regarding every major development unfolding around him regardless of how insignificant it initially seemed. So him breaking tradition like this felt surprising to Leo to say the least. So have we confirmed whether this meeting actually happened? Leo questioned eventually while continuing to stare toward the photograph silently. As hearing that question, Shadow Number 1 immediately lowered his head further. I received the photograph roughly 18 hours ago, my lord. Shadow Number 1 explained while his voice carried visible hesitation. Initially, I chose not to immediately present it before you because I believed there was a strong possibility this was simply another one of the deceiver's psychological games. He continued while Leo quietly listened. And because of that, before disturbing you with such a serious matter, I wanted to confirm its authenticity personally first. Shadow Number 1 explained as Leo slowly nodded in acknowledgement. So I waited for Lord Caleb to emerge from his chambers before discreetly having members of the Shadow Network question him regarding the matter. A heavy silence lingered briefly before the Shadow finally continued further. And unfortunately, the meeting did indeed take place. Shadow Number 1 admitted as Leo's fingers slowly tightened around the photograph unconsciously. According to Lord Caleb's explanation, Lady Sophia was abducted by the demigod Terence. After which, he received a threat ordering him to travel alone toward deep space in exchange for her safety, which he complied with immediately. Shadow Number 1 continued while the atmosphere around the cliffs gradually became heavier. Lady Sophia has since safely returned unharmed, however the fact remains that Lord Caleb and the deceiver did meet privately within deep space exactly as shown within that photograph. Shadow Number 1 concluded as for several moments, Leo remained completely silent. Then slowly, he began chuckling with gritted teeth. Not because he found the situation amusing, but because deep within himself, he already understood exactly what kind of game Morris was attempting to play now. So, Leo muttered while staring toward the skies above silently. What price did my son pay to retrieve his wife safely? What kind of deal did he make with the devil? Leo questioned as hearing those words. Shadow Number 1 lowered his gaze once more. I don't know, my lord. He admitted honestly. Lord Caleb insists repeatedly that he made no agreement whatsoever with the deceiver, and personally speaking, I genuinely struggle to believe that he would willingly betray either you or the cult intentionally. Shadow Number 1 explained while visible conflict surfaced within his expression. However, he paused briefly. According to Caleb himself, before the meeting concluded, Morris apparently told him something rather disturbing. Leo's eyes slowly shifted toward the shadow. What exactly did he say? Leo questioned quietly as Shadow Number 1 inhaled deeply before answering. The deceiver reportedly told Lord Caleb, "You already betrayed your father the moment you chose to come here alone. By appearing before me today, you already set events into motion that can never again be undone." Shadow Number 1 quoted while even repeating the words seemed to visibly disturb him internally. And because of that, my lord, I genuinely don't know what to think regarding this situation anymore. He admitted while frustration surfaced within his voice naturally now. My mind tells me it makes absolutely no sense for the deceiver to abduct Lady Sophia, only to release her again without demanding anything in return. His expression darkened further. And yet at the same time, my heart genuinely refuses to believe Lord Caleb is the type of man capable of betraying you willingly. Shadow Number 1 concluded as silence gradually settled across the cliffs afterward. Only the distant crashing of ocean waves echoed throughout the eternal garden while Leo quietly continued staring toward the photograph within his hands. Because although he still trusted Caleb deeply, the doubt planted by Morris had nevertheless succeeded in entering his mind. As what worried Leo was not the meeting itself, but rather the fact that Caleb chose to hide it from him. Is history repeating itself once again? Leo wondered silently while unconsciously tightening his grip around the photograph further. Because despite everything, despite still believing in his son more than almost anyone else within the universe, the more he attempted convincing himself not to dwell on the matter, the more impossible it became to stop thinking about it at all. A few days after the incident, Myron's POV. A few days after Caleb's meeting with the deceiver, Myron personally decided to visit his elder brother out of concern, as among the small circle of people informed regarding the incident, he was one of the few trusted enough to know the full situation. It's been a while since I last saw you, brother. Myron muttered while stepping forward and pulling Caleb into a tight embrace immediately, as Caleb returned the hug warmly without hesitation. You haven't visited me since the wedding. Seems like you've become too busy these days to care about your older brother anymore. Caleb replied while smiling faintly, as Myron immediately chuckled and shook his head. No, it's not like that and you already know it. Running the fundamentalists alone is already difficult enough, however on top of that, Father has been training me personally these days like he's trying to kill me. Myron explained while letting out a tired sigh. Honestly speaking, the old man's training feels like absolute hell sometimes, but strangely enough, I still enjoy it. Myron admitted as Caleb nodded in understanding immediately. I heard you started drinking recently. Come, I've got something good hidden away for occasions like this, Caleb said as the two brothers eventually sat across from one another beside a small table, while Caleb poured drinks quietly into 2 crystal glasses before sliding one across toward Myron. For several long moments afterward, neither brother said anything further, as Myron simply took a slow sip from his drink while quietly studying Caleb's expression, waiting to see if his older brother intended to bring up the incident himself. However, as the silence gradually stretched longer and longer, Myron eventually decided to speak first. I was training with Father recently and honestly, he seemed disturbed, Myron admitted while placing the glass down calmly. Did something happen during your meeting with the deceiver? Myron questioned as Caleb immediately looked toward him with one eyebrow raised slightly. Nothing happened, Caleb replied firmly while leaning back slightly against his chair. That's exactly why I didn't even bother going personally to the Eternal Garden to explain the situation. Because there genuinely isn't anything more for me to add beyond the report I already gave. Caleb explained while maintaining direct eye contact calmly. Sophia was abducted. I went there alone to retrieve her safely. Morris tried playing his usual psychological games. Then he returned her unharmed. Caleb continued while shrugging lightly. That's all. Myron quietly listened while slowly swirling the drink within his glass. Well, this is still the same deceiver who cost Father a finger. Myron muttered while frowning slightly. You already know how that lunatic operates. Personally, I think he's too full of himself, but I don't think he's the type that does stuff for no reason. His expression darkened further afterward. However, I didn't expect him to be bold enough to directly abduct Sophia like this. Myron admitted as Caleb slowly nodded. Yeah, honestly speaking, the entire incident made me realize just how weak I still am. Caleb muttered while staring silently toward the drink resting before him. Because at the end of the day, if I genuinely want to protect my family properly, then I need to become significantly stronger than I currently am. Caleb admitted as instantly, Myron raised one eyebrow. My family. Myron repeated while intentionally stressing the word slightly, as Caleb immediately realized his mistake and coughed awkwardly. Our family. I meant our family. Caleb corrected quickly while rubbing the back of his neck. I'm married now, so sometimes my thoughts naturally drift toward Sophia and the child first before anything else. Caleb admitted as Myron suddenly paused mid-sip. The child? Myron questioned while staring toward Caleb in surprise. As realizing what he accidentally revealed, Caleb let out a quiet laugh. Yeah, apparently Sophia's pregnant, Caleb admitted while smiling faintly now. I only found out about it when I was talking with Morris, but apparently we are having a boy. Caleb explained as hearing those words, Myron's expression immediately shifted slightly. Not because he disliked the news. Quite the opposite. Deep within himself, he genuinely felt happy hearing that he was about to become an uncle. However, what bothered him was something else entirely. Wait, do Father and Mother have any idea about this? Myron questioned as Caleb slowly shook his head. No, not yet, Caleb admitted quietly, as Myron instantly shook his head in disappointment. Honestly speaking, after everything that unfolded recently, it just didn't feel like the right moment to suddenly walk into the Eternal Garden and announce good news while Father's already stressed over the whole Morris situation. Caleb explained while looking slightly conflicted. I figured I'd wait a few more days until things settled down a little before telling everyone properly. Then we can celebrate it the way it deserves. Caleb concluded as Myron slowly took another sip from his drink while quietly processing those words. Because throughout their entire lives, Caleb had always been the more composed and responsible brother between the two of them. And even now, Myron still did not believe Caleb was acting irrationally. However, lately, something about his elder brother genuinely felt different. As though slowly, little by little, Caleb had begun thinking less like a Skyshard son and more like a man trying to create an independent family separate from the rest of them. And although Myron did not necessarily dislike that development, it still felt strange. Looks like the times are changing, brother. Myron admitted openly while setting his glass down finally. You've changed since the marriage. He continued while Caleb quietly listened. And honestly speaking, I genuinely hope it's for the better. However, just in case someday you feel yourself drifting too far away from the man you used to be. Myron slowly looked directly into Caleb's eyes. Then just remember that you can always rely on me to drag you back if necessary. Myron offered with a completely serious expression, as Caleb raised an eyebrow at those words. The bond between us is absolute. That part will never change regardless of what happens in the future. Myron assured, as this time, Caleb frowned slightly hearing those words. What exactly is that supposed to mean? Caleb questioned while Myron calmly finished the remaining drink inside his glass before standing up slowly from his seat. It means that if something happens someday that you can't handle alone. Myron began while turning slightly toward the doorway. Then stop trying to shoulder everything by yourself like you did during this entire Sophia incident. He continued while Caleb silently stared toward him. You have a brother willing to die for you without hesitation. And you have a father capable of solving almost any problem within this universe. Myron explained while his voice gradually softened slightly. So even if marriage makes you start thinking differently now, don't ever forget that your blood still belongs to House Skyshard. Myron muttered before finally beginning to walk toward the exit calmly. I said what I needed to say today. I hope you reflect on it without getting angry. Myron concluded as although he could feel Caleb frowning silently behind his back. He found absolutely no reason to soften his words. Because deep within himself, Myron genuinely believed Caleb needed to hear them. Over the next few months, House Skyshard. Over the next few months, joy gradually returned to House Skyshard once again, as the news regarding Sophia's pregnancy and the upcoming arrival of the family's first grandchild slowly changed the atmosphere surrounding the Eternal Garden. The tension left behind by Morris's schemes gradually faded into the background, while old wounds within the family quietly began healing on their own in the presence of new life soon arriving into the universe. As even Leo himself slowly softened during this period. Because despite everything currently unfolding throughout the universe, the thought of becoming a grandfather genuinely brought him a strange sense of peace that he had not felt in many years. As eventually, once Sophia entered the 6th month of her pregnancy, Amanda personally moved her from the frontier worlds toward the Eternal Garden, as she insisted on supervising the final trimester personally instead of allowing Caleb's wife to remain upon unstable military planets any longer. And surprisingly enough, Sophia and Amanda got along extremely well. The older woman treated her almost like a daughter, while Sophia quietly listened to Amanda's endless advice regarding childbirth, family life, and how unbearably stubborn the Skyshard men could become whenever they focused too heavily upon responsibility. Meanwhile, Caleb himself became a frequent visitor to the Eternal Garden during this period as well. And slowly, the awkwardness lingering between him and Leo finally disappeared completely. The father and son gradually returned to speaking naturally again, while the suspicion and emotional tension created by Morris's schemes slowly lost their influence over the household entirely. In the end, blood still remained blood. And Leo ultimately chose trust over doubt. At the same time, just like Myron, Caleb also officially began training beneath Leo once again, as after the Sophia incident, Caleb finally understood clearly that his current strength remained insufficient for protecting the people he truly cared about. And because of that realization, he requested that Leo train him hard, as Leo guided him towards becoming a powerful demigod by helping him identify and overcome the shortcomings in his current fighting style. However, while helping his children grow stronger, Leo himself also gradually reached a decision regarding something extremely important. Because during his moments alone, Leo found himself returning to planet V-Star, where he spent long periods of time consulting with the timeless assassin's projection about his future. Meanwhile, planet V-Star. Inside the rune-inscribed hut hidden deep within planet V-Star, Leo quietly sat across from the timeless assassin's projection while ancient runes glowed softly around the dim interior. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then eventually, Leo leaned slightly backward before breaking the silence himself. I finally understand now why you became so obsessed with leaving shrines like these scattered throughout the universe. Leo admitted while glancing calmly toward the walls surrounding them. Legacies. Guides for future generations. Something capable of surviving even if everything else you built gets erased someday. Leo muttered while the projection quietly listened. And honestly speaking, I think I'm going to do the same eventually. Leo continued while faint contemplation surfaced within his eyes. I'll leave behind parts of my legacy scattered throughout the universe in different forms. Some through skill scrolls, some through books and records. And for the most deserving individuals someday. Leo slowly looked around the hut once more. Perhaps I'll build shrines similar to this one too, so that thousands of years from now, future generations can still receive guidance from me, the same way you guided me. Leo shared as hearing those words, the timeless assassin's projection immediately began stroking his beard while chuckling quietly. So you finally reached a decision regarding godhood then? The projection observed as Leo slowly nodded. Yeah, I thought about it for a long time. Leo admitted while his expression gradually became more serious. At first, I genuinely questioned whether I even needed to ascend any further. However, eventually, I realized something important. Leo continued while calmly intertwining his fingers together. It's always better to possess strength you never end up needing, than to someday desperately require strength you failed to obtain beforehand. Leo explained while the projection quietly nodded in approval. So yes, I've decided that I'll ascend to godhood. Leo admitted calmly. However, once I do, I'll keep it hidden from everyone until the final war begins. A dangerous calm lingered behind his voice while even the projection's expression sharpened slightly. I won't tell Amanda. I won't tell my children. I won't tell the cult shadows are there. Nobody will know. Leo continued while his gray eyes gradually darkened. I'll allow the entire universe to continue believing I remain a demigod until the exact moment revealing the truth becomes necessary. Leo concluded as the timeless assassin's projection slowly nodded again. A wise choice. The projection muttered thoughtfully. But tell me something, cult master. When do you believe the final war will begin? He questioned as Leo quietly shrugged his shoulders. Sometime within this decade for sure. Leo answered calmly. Right now everybody's consolidating their strength quietly while Morris continues weaving his web of deceit beneath the surface. Leo explained while glancing toward the flickering runes nearby. However, eventually the pressure will become too great. The great clans are afraid. The dragons are unstable. Morris is manipulating everybody simultaneously. And the cult itself is already growing too powerful for the others to tolerate us much longer. Leo continued while the projection quietly listened. So sooner or later, everything is going to boil over. Leo concluded as the timeless assassin's projection slowly closed his eyes for several moments before speaking again. I genuinely hope the outcome of your final war differs from mine. The projection admitted quietly. Because defeating history itself is not nearly as easy as people imagine. He muttered while Leo suddenly laughed softly hearing those words. Overcoming history isn't easy when you keep trying to solve problems exactly the same way your predecessors did. Leo replied while slowly standing up from his seat. However, your failures are exactly what taught me how to avoid repeating them. Leo explained while turning toward the hut's exit calmly, as he stood up and walked towards it, while smiling faintly from ear to ear. Until next time then, old man. The next time you see me, I'll hopefully already be a god. Leo muttered before disappearing into the fourth dimension. Meanwhile behind him, the timeless assassin's projection quietly smiled. Yes. Until next time then, war god Leo. The projection replied softly, as the ancient hut gradually returned to silence once again. Planet Granada, Leonardo's POV. Rain poured endlessly across the lonely rock of Granada while thunder rolled through the dark heavens overhead, as Leonardo stood silently beneath the storm clouds with his remaining arm folded behind his back while staring toward the deceiver standing opposite him. Ever since losing his arm during the battle against Caliph, the constant pain lingering within his body had never truly disappeared. Some days were better than others, while others felt completely unbearable. However, there had not been a single day where the pain vanished completely. And so, ever since that fight, Leonardo had started to go down a road of self-doubt and self-discovery, because receiving origin poisoning was not like any other wound. It was a sentence, a slow death, one that would accompany him until the very end. Meanwhile, standing opposite him, Morris quietly observed the missing arm before eventually breaking into laughter. Ha 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 ha. So the battle against Caliph truly wasn't without a cost after all. Skyshard paid the price for killing the Eternal Sovereign in the form of having his nephew lose an arm. Morris muttered as amusement danced within his eyes. Instantly, Leonardo felt anger surge through his chest, as he clenched his fists and said, I wasn't ready for that battle. I should never have been there in the first place. It hadn't even been a full month since I reached the demigod realm before my uncle dragged me into a war against monsters who had existed for thousands of years. Leonardo replied as bitterness gradually surfaced within his voice. And now because of it, despite becoming a demigod, I have barely more than a century left to live. And it will be a century spent enduring constant pain at that. Leonardo continued as he pointed toward the ruined arm, while Morris simply listened quietly and observed his aura for any signs of inconsistency. Then unexpectedly, Morris nodded. Honestly, you're right, Morris admitted as rainwater slid down his face. Skyshard should have known better. Taking a newly ascended demigod into that battlefield was reckless. Morris continued as Leonardo remained silent. Then again, Skyshard has always been selfish. Morris muttered while smiling faintly. Himself and his cult. That's all he cares about. Morris continued as his gaze sharpened slightly. Otherwise tell me honestly, Leonardo. If he truly cared about you as much as he claimed, would you be standing here with one arm and a death sentence hanging over your head? Morris questioned as Leonardo instinctively looked away. Deep down, a part of him wanted to reject the statement entirely. Yet another part of him, one that was already tired of the constant pain, could not help but agree to it. As watching him hesitate, Morris decided to strike the iron while it was still hot. Well, let me tell you something about myself, Leonardo. Unlike Skyshard, I actually care about your future. Morris said as Leonardo immediately looked back toward him. And unlike the cult, I possess a solution to this problem of yours. Morris continued as a dangerous smile slowly spread across his face. A solution to the origin poisoning. A solution to the pain. A solution to your lifespan. Morris explained as Leonardo's expression finally shifted. For the first time since arriving here, genuine interest surfaced within his eyes. What kind of solution? Leonardo questioned as his heartbeat gradually accelerated. A body transfer. Morris answered casually. The body dies. The soul survives. The poison remains behind, while you move into a new vessel entirely. Morris explained as Leonardo froze. You've seen it already. Multheric walks around in Helmuth's body despite losing his own. The process works if done correctly. Morris continued while shrugging his shoulders. You could choose almost anyone. A strange gleam appeared within his eyes. Skyshard, Sparrow, one of the great clan heirs. Some other prodigy within the cult that's caught your fancy. The choice hardly matters, Morris explained as silence gradually settled between them. For several moments, neither of them spoke a word, as rain continued falling, and thunder continued rumbling on Granada, until eventually, Leonardo looked up again. And you're certain it would remove the origin poisoning? Leonardo questioned as his voice carried far more weight than before. Absolutely. Morris replied without hesitation. You would walk away with a healthy body and a future once more. Morris assured as Leonardo slowly closed his eyes. A future. The words echoed repeatedly within his mind, as he thought about a day when he could live once more without the pain and the certainty of death. And after thinking about it for a while, as he opened his eyes again, he found Morris to be smiling rather evilly, as just looking at that smile, Leonardo understood that there was obviously a price attached to this offer. What do you want in return? Leonardo questioned as Morris immediately laughed. Ha 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 ha. Straight to the important part. Good. Morris muttered while nodding approvingly. What I want is actually very simple. What I want is the next great betrayal. Morris explained as his expression gradually became more serious. Soon, events are going to unfold that will reshape the entire universe. He continued as the storm intensified overhead. And when that day comes, I need someone on the inside. Morris explained while staring directly into Leonardo's eyes. Someone close enough to the cult leadership that information flows naturally. Someone trusted. Someone like you. Morris continued as Leonardo remained completely still. You don't need to make any decisions today. You don't need to betray anyone today. You don't even need to fully understand the role you'll play. Morris explained as a dangerous calm settled over his voice. All I require is your cooperation when the time comes. Morris offered, as for several long moments neither of them spoke, as Leonardo remained completely motionless while staring toward the ruined shoulder where his arm used to be, feeling the familiar ache buried deep within the poisoned flesh as thoughts of his stolen future, his shortened lifespan, and the century of pain waiting ahead slowly resurfaced one after another. Eventually, his gaze lowered further while he quietly contemplated everything Morris had just offered him, because regardless of how much he distrusted the deceiver, the temptation currently being placed before him was simply too great to dismiss outright, as the promise of escaping the agony that would otherwise define the remainder of his life struck directly at the deepest insecurity he carried within himself. Then finally, after what felt like an eternity of internal struggle, Leonardo slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Tell me what you need me to do. Leonardo muttered as he lowered his gaze, while for a brief moment, even the storm itself seemed strangely quiet around them. Then suddenly, Morris began laughing. Ha 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 ha. Excellent. Absolutely excellent. Morris declared as satisfaction flooded his expression, because with Leonardo now standing exactly where he wanted him to stand, the final piece required to set years of planning into motion had finally fallen into place, as for the first time in a very long while, the deceiver genuinely believed that the greatest betrayal in the history of the universe was finally ready to begin. Over the next few months, House Skyshard. Over the next few months, the birth of Caleb and Sophia's son, turned the atmosphere on Eternal Garden extremely joyful and harmonious. The child was named Liam Skyshard, and from the very first day of his birth, it became abundantly clear that the boy would never experience a shortage of affection. Grandma Amanda adored him. Grandpa Leo gushed over him, while Uncle Myron treated him as though he were the greatest treasure in existence, going out of his way to make the baby laugh. Even individuals like Shadow Number 1 and Dumpy, who normally showed very little interest in infants, found themselves visiting regularly simply to spend a few minutes beside the child. As for Liam himself, he appeared completely unaware of the chaos he had created, spending most of his days sleeping peacefully while unintentionally commanding the attention of some of the most powerful individuals in the universe. Meanwhile, although Sophia remained within the Eternal Garden raising their son, duty still forced Caleb to divide his time between family and responsibility. Because regardless of how much he wanted to remain beside his wife and child, reality demanded that he leave to fulfill his duty as a cult commander on the frontier planets. As every few days, he was forced to leave for 2 to 3 weeks, before coming back for a few more days, and repeating the cycle all over again. Fortunately, the relationship between him and Leo had recovered significantly by this point, as the doubts planted by Morris seemed to have lost their influence, while trust slowly re-established itself between father and son. And for a while, life genuinely felt peaceful. However, beneath that peace countless invisible pieces continued moving throughout the universe, as every single one of those pieces was quietly being guided by the same hand. The Deceiver. Meanwhile, Caleb's POV. Shortly before departing for another routine assignment upon planet Phoenix Star, Caleb spent one final afternoon within the Eternal Garden. At the time, nothing about the day felt unusual. Nothing felt ominous. Nothing felt important, which was perhaps why the memory would later linger within his mind so clearly. Liam rested quietly within Sophia's arms while Amanda fussed over the child endlessly, insisting that he needed another blanket despite the Eternal Garden possessing a perfectly controlled climate. Meanwhile, Myron stood nearby attempting to teach a baby barely capable of focusing his eyes how to throw a punch, while Leo watched the entire scene unfold with visible disappointment. "You're going to make the boy stupid before he can even walk," Leo muttered while shaking his head. Myron immediately scoffed hearing that accusation. "That's impossible. I'm living proof that intelligence survives regardless of childhood conditions," Myron replied as Amanda immediately smacked him across the back of the head, as laughter followed throughout the garden. For a while, Caleb simply smiled looking at all this, as for the first time in a very long while, everything felt complete. Then suddenly, Liam reached outward with his tiny hand and wrapped his fingers around Caleb's thumb. The grip was weak, barely noticeable, yet somehow it completely froze Caleb in place. Because despite commanding armies and overseeing planetary campaigns regularly, nothing had ever made him feel more responsible than that tiny hand. "I'll be back in a few days," Caleb promised while gently rubbing Liam's head. As Sophia smiled warmly hearing those words. 3 weeks, not a day more. "Okay," Sophia warned as Caleb laughed softly before leaning forward and kissing her forehead, as at the time, neither of them realized how much they would come to regret that conversation. A few days later, planet Phoenix Star. It seemed like just another normal day on planet Phoenix Star, as military installations operated normally, supply convoys moved according to schedule, administrative departments filed reports, while Caleb spent most of the day buried beneath an ocean of paperwork as he reviewed troop deployments throughout the surrounding sector. Which was precisely why, when the calamity began, he was caught completely off guard, as it was not like anyone in the universe could have predicted what was about to unfold. Tremble. Alarms blaring. The first warning came when the entire planet's land surface began trembling, while every aura warning device activated simultaneously. What's going on?" Caleb's assistant muttered, as Caleb instantly jumped out of the window and flew towards the sky, where he spotted the second warning. FSHHHHH. Across the sky, several dimensional portals opened simultaneously, as Caleb momentarily forgot how to breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Caleb counted nervously, as at that moment, the third and final warning came, as the sky itself split open. Crack. It seemed like reality itself had fractured, as all color drained from the planet's atmosphere, while the temperature began to drop rapidly, as Caleb immediately felt his blood run cold. "It's a coordinated attack. The whole New Age Alliance," he mumbled, recording a quick message for his father, as before him appeared 5 gods. Mu Shen, Luhan, Du Trask, Multheric, and Morris. All 5 surviving gods of the universe appeared on planet Phoenix Prime at once, while behind them stood Clarence and Terrence to complete the fighting pool. "Raise every planetary shield immediately. Activate all emergency evacuation protocols. Get every civilian underground now. Caleb ordered over the comms, as below him soldiers and officers scrambled desperately to obey. However, unfortunately for them, it was already too late. Grab the boy. Destroy everything else. Morris ordered as his voice echoed across the entire planet. And then hell descended. Boom. Divine attacks rained down from the heavens while entire continents ruptured beneath overwhelming force, as cities vanished within seconds while billions died before they even understood what was happening. Cult defenders attempted resisting. Planetary weapons fired. Emergency formations activated. Yet against the combined might of 5 gods and 2 demigods, every effort proved meaningless. As within mere minutes, Phoenix Star transformed into a graveyard, while Caleb, its sole survivor, was taken captive. Clink-clack. Chains forged from divine energy wrapped around his body while multiple gods personally ensured that escape became impossible, as they dragged him to the scorched earth, and bound him amidst the rubble. You're doomed now, deceiver. You shouldn't have attacked a cult world so brazenly. My father and every cult commander will be here soon. Caleb growled while struggling against his restraints, as hearing those words, Morris began laughing. Ha 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 ha. Oh, don't worry about that, Caleb Skyshard. That's exactly what we're counting on. Morris muttered while nearby gods began carving massive runes directly into the shattered surface of the planet. The only reason we chose you instead of Myron is because I know exactly how your family operates. Morris continued while the formation expanded further. Your brother would march into certain death without hesitation if he believed you needed saving. As for your father, Morris smiled. We both know he'll come too. Morris explained while Caleb's expression darkened. Today every road in the universe leads to Phoenix Star. Morris continued while the final layers of the formation began taking shape. Your father will come. Your brother will come. The cult commanders will come. The cult army will come. Morris declared while satisfaction flooded his expression. And when they arrive here believing they're marching toward a rescue mission. He muttered while looking toward the heavens. They'll discover that they were actually walking straight into their own funeral. Morris concluded as the final rune ignited beneath Caleb's feet, bathing the ruined world in a terrifying crimson light. Meanwhile the Eternal Garden, Leo's POV. The instant Leo received Caleb's distress call, he let out a deep sigh before looking toward the heavens above, as despite having spent years preparing for this exact moment, now that it was finally here, he felt nervous nonetheless. So it begins. Leo muttered as he rose from his seat and quickly discarded his formal robes, changing into his battle attire as he secured the origin daggers around his waist and slicked his hair back so that no stray strand would fall over his forehead. No matter what happens, I cannot let any of them get away today. Leo reminded himself before opening a fourth-dimensional portal, as he confidently stepped into it and headed toward planet Yamuna to collect Sparrow and Dumpy first. At the same time, emergency signals spread throughout cult territory, reaching every major commander and military leader simultaneously, as years of preparation immediately paid off the moment the contingency protocols activated. For this battle, Leo had already decided exactly who would accompany him, choosing only the strongest individuals available, as Leonardo, Myron, Vare, Dumpy, Anderson Silva, Mickey James, and the rest of the cult's elite prepared for deployment the instant the order arrived. As within barely 15 minutes of Caleb's distress call being transmitted, the most powerful force the cult could assemble was already on the move toward Phoenix Star. FSHHHHH. A colossal fourth-dimensional portal opened above the burning skies of planet Phoenix Star while divine energy flooded across the battlefield below, as every god, demigod, and surviving soldier present instinctively turned their attention toward the heavens. Leo emerged first, his gray eyes fearlessly looking down on the gathered gods below like an overlord looking down at insects, while the rest of the cult slowly came out from behind him. For several moments, nobody spoke as Leo silently observed the ruined world beneath him, because from his position high above the atmosphere, he could sense the death lingering across the planet like a wound carved directly into reality itself. Entire continents had been razed mercilessly. Military installations had ceased to exist. Billions of civilians who had once called Phoenix Star home were gone. And although rage slowly built inside Leo's chest as he sensed the scale of the slaughter, he forcibly suppressed the emotion before it could influence his judgment. There will be time for anger later, first I need to rescue my son. Leo reminded himself, as he let out a controlled breath and looked down towards the center of the battlefield where Caleb was chained amidst 5 enemy gods and 2 demigods. Mu Shen, Luhan, Dutrask, Multheric, Morris, Clarence, Terrence. They were all present, as it seemed like Morris had pulled out all the stops to ensure that it was his side that would ultimately emerge the victors from this war. However, even that was not what concerned Leo the most. Because beneath Caleb's feet, stretching across enormous portions of the shattered planetary surface, a gigantic crimson formation burned with terrifying intensity. The formation differed completely from the Chakravya. Its structure was different. Its energy circulation was different. Even the laws woven throughout its framework felt foreign. Yet despite not recognizing it, Leo immediately understood one thing. This was not something drawn hastily. This was something that had taken years to prepare, which was odd considering how the cult had only captured planet Phoenix less than 4 months ago. Wild amounts of mana surged through every carved line while traces of divine essence flowed through the formation like blood through veins, as the entire structure radiated enough power to make even Leo feel instinctively cautious. Morris, so you've finally lost your damn mind and attacked my son. I guess, you really are not as smart as the universe thinks you are. Leo muttered as he slowly descended toward the battlefield below. Beside him, Myron looked ready to explode. The younger Skyshard's eyes remained fixed upon Morris while murderous intent leaked uncontrollably from his body, as if not for Leo extending an arm across his chest to stop him, he would have already charged directly toward the enemy. You will have your chance, Myron. But it's foolish to charge headfirst into battle. Leo muttered calmly, as he forced Myron to stay put while continuing to descend slowly. Meanwhile, behind him, another confrontation quietly unfolded as Dumpy's gaze locked directly onto Multheric while the Dragon King stared back without the slightest trace of hesitation. For several long moments neither beast looked away, as despite the overwhelming difference in age and experience between them, Dumpy refused to yield even an inch. The hostility felt instinctive, ancient, primal, as though the universe itself had decided long ago that dragons and swamp frogs were never meant to coexist peacefully. I had no idea that a disgusting swamp frog managed to climb high enough to become a beast king. Multheric muttered while studying Dumpy carefully, as the Dragon King's golden eyes slowly narrowed. Regardless of how this battle ends today, I can promise you one thing. You will not leave this battlefield alive, Multheric declared as the surrounding air immediately grew heavier beneath the pressure of his aura. Dumpy remained completely unfazed. Instead, he folded his arms across his chest while staring directly into the Dragon King's eyes. Son, don't overestimate yourself. Dumpy replied as his deep voice echoed across the battlefield. If there is someone not leaving this battlefield alive today, it is undoubtedly you. Dumpy continued while proudly puffing out his chest. You currently stand in the presence of Lord Dumpy, loyal servant to Cult Master Leo Skyshard, the one and only rightful overlord of this universe. Dumpy declared as several cult commanders immediately lowered their heads, while Leonardo visibly pinched the bridge of his nose in second-hand embarrassment. And I'll be damned if, as his pet, I can't even deal with one oversized lizard. Dumpy concluded as a wide grin immediately spread across Multherac's face. To the surprise of nearly everyone present, the Dragon King actually seemed pleased by the response, because if there was one thing Multheric respected throughout his long life, it was courage. He had fought complicated fighters like Caliph. He had fought schemers like Zonrock. He had fought manipulators who preferred hiding behind plans and negotiations. However, the giant swamp frog standing before him clearly intended to settle matters through strength alone. Ha 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 ha. Multheric laughed as genuine excitement surfaced within his eyes. Good. Very good. Multheric muttered while rolling his shoulders and taking a step forward. Perhaps this battle won't be completely boring after all. Multheric concluded as he unleashed his killing intent in full, causing Dumpy to respond in kind, as the temperature on the surface of planet Phoenix Prime instantly began to shoot up due to the two ancient bloodlines clashing. Dumpy and Multheric were not the only ones trying to intimidate the other, as a few seconds after their auras clashed, the others joined the fray, as before a single blow was exchanged, the fight became a test of aura. Push back. The great clan gods and Morris tried their best to project strength and knock out the mortals on the cult side before the fight even began, while Leonardo and Vert tried to protect them as best as they could. Boom. The entire planet began to tremble violently beneath the collision of so many powerful auras, as already shattered continents broke apart further while mountain ranges collapsed into rubble and the atmosphere itself warped beneath the strain of 11 divine beings unleashing their presence simultaneously. The skies cracked overhead while the oceans churned uncontrollably below, as countless new fractures spread across the ruined surface of Phoenix Star. Meanwhile, standing behind Leo's protection, Myron felt sweat slowly forming across his forehead as he fought to remain composed beneath the crushing pressure. Because despite spending years pursuing strength and enduring Leo's brutal training methods, only now did he truly understand how vast the distance remained between himself and the individuals standing at the very peak of the universe. And here I thought I was a pretty powerful monarch already. Myron thought self-depreciatingly, as he realized that he was just a big fish in a small pond and nothing more. So this is what Father had been facing all these years. Myron wondered, as for the first time, he stopped comparing himself to his peers and began comparing himself to Leo Skyshard and realized that compared to his old man, he was nothing much. However, he was not the only one suffering, as nearby, Mickey James also found himself arriving at a similar realization. For decades he had served as one of the cult's greatest commanders, leading armies, conquering worlds, and crushing opposition wherever the cult expanded. However, standing amidst this clash of divine auras made those achievements suddenly feel far less significant than they once had. Because although the battle itself had not even started yet, and still he felt dizzy from merely remaining in its vicinity, as the pressure generated by the gathered gods forced him to use all his willpower just to stay awake. I hope someone breaks this soon, I can't take this for too long. Mickey thought, as at that very moment, Vare and Dumpy finally stepped forward to make their move, with Vare unleashing planet-splitting slash while Dumpy simultaneously activated Swamp Rain. Swoosh. Rain drizzle. Within a split second, Vare's attack, capable of cleaving entire continents apart, swept across the battlefield with overwhelming force, as the assembled gods were collectively forced to retreat a step under its pressure despite reacting immediately to defend themselves. However, as terrifying as the slash itself was, the attack merely served as a distraction for what followed next, as a thick acidic mist rapidly spread throughout the skies while Dumpy's rain blanketed the battlefield from every direction, leaving nowhere to hide and reducing visibility to almost nothing in an instant. The corrosive droplets burned flesh, armor, and divine steel alike upon contact, while the dense fog obscured every line of sight, forcing gods and demigods alike to abandon their eyes entirely and rely solely upon mana perception and divine essence senses to track their opponents. The rain is extremely painful, but bear it. Do not waste time trying to avoid it, or you'll be playing directly into their hands. Morris warned as Multheric immediately understood the danger and burst toward Dumpy at full speed, as the Dragon King ignored the acid eating into his skin and charged straight through the storm without hesitation. Yet despite watching one of the strongest beings in existence hurtling toward him, Dumpy remained completely calm, because from the very beginning, his role in this battle had been predefined by Leo, and at this moment, he needed to perform a duty that was more important than stopping Multheric. Mana nullification. Divine essence interference. At once, Dumpy activated both bloodline abilities simultaneously, as an invisible wave spread throughout the battlefield and disrupted the flow of power around every enemy combatant present. What's happening? Why can't I properly circulate my divine essence? Mu Shen questioned as alarm immediately surfaced within his eyes, because for a brief moment he felt completely disconnected from the power that had accompanied him for countless centuries. At that same instant, an overwhelming sense of danger washed over him. Every instinct he possessed screamed that something was terribly wrong. I need to move. Now, Mu Shen thought. However, before he could take even a single step backward, Leo emerged using seconds walk directly behind him and swung his blade in one clean, merciless arc. Slash. Crownfall. The strike landed so quickly that Mu Shen never even saw it coming, as his head separated from his shoulders before the warning bells in his mind had finished ringing. For a brief moment, Mu Shen did not even realize what had happened, as from his perspective he was still standing upon the battlefield attempting to force divine essence through his disrupted circuits while turning around to face the threat lurking behind him, only for the entire world to suddenly tilt sideways without warning. The burning skies rotated strangely above him while his vision began drifting toward the shattered ground below, as only then did he notice his own body still standing several meters away with blood erupting from the neck. What? Mu Shen thought, as confusion briefly overwhelmed him before the complete absence of pain allowed him to understand the truth almost immediately. The final strike had landed with such overwhelming speed and precision that his body had already been severed before his instincts could properly react to the danger, as even now, while his consciousness remained active, his corpse was already falling apart beneath him. So this is how it ends, he thought, as countless memories began flashing through his mind while the final fragments of consciousness slowly slipped away, carrying him back through the countless centuries he had spent walking the path of power. He remembered the rise of the Mu clan, the wars that forged his reputation, the allies he had buried, the enemies he had outlived, and the endless years spent pursuing greater strength, as all of it ultimately led him to this battlefield where a god had been reduced to a corpse in a single exchange. As darkness gradually closed around him and the connection between body and soul weakened further with every passing second, Mu Shen found that in the end he only hated one man. I should have never trusted the deceiver. In the end, he was the one who cost me my life. He thought, as his severed head struck the ruined battlefield and rolled across the broken earth beneath the acid rain, Mu Shen's soul quietly faded into nothingness. Mu Shen's death shocked everyone present on the battlefield, as although everyone already knew of Leo's reputation for slaying gods, actually witnessing him take one down before their very eyes was an entirely different experience altogether, leaving even seasoned warriors momentarily stunned by the sheer speed with which the bottle's first casualty had fallen. He killed a god just like that. Luhan and Dutrask wondered, as both gods collectively felt a chill run down their spines, because although it was Mu Shen whose head currently rolled across the battlefield, neither of them could ignore the fact that under those exact same circumstances, it could just as easily have been one of them lying dead upon the ground instead. However, while they did fear Leo's speed, that fear was instantly replaced by a predatory sense of opportunity when they saw Leo finally plant his feet on the ground. Land. The second that Leo put his feet on the ground, Morris activated the secret formation that he had prepared, as suddenly, Leo felt as though his feet had been glued to the ground. It's done. He's taken the bait. He's standing on the formation. Luhan muttered as excitement gradually surfaced within his eyes. Almost immediately, he swung his sword and unleashed a slash toward Leo from across the battlefield, not because he genuinely expected the attack to accomplish anything meaningful, but because he wanted to confirm whether the formation was functioning as intended. SHHHHHK. The sword slash crossed the battlefield instantly. Normally, Leo would have simply vanished from sight and reappeared somewhere else entirely. However, to Luhan's delight, that did not happen. Instead, Leo crossed both daggers before himself and blocked the attack directly. BOOOOM. The impact blasted apart the ground beneath his feet while crimson formation lines glowed brightly around him. And at that moment, every member of the alliance finally understood something. That the formation was working as intended. What the hell? Leo thought as he immediately sensed something profoundly wrong with his body. The moment his feet touched the ground, the formation beneath him seemed to come alive. Invisible currents surged through the crimson lines while enormous quantities of mana and divine essence began draining from his body continuously, as though the planet itself had transformed into a gigantic parasite feeding directly upon him. He could still move and fight, however every action now demanded significantly more energy than before, as even the simplest movements consumed far more strength than they normally would. His body felt unnaturally heavy while his reactions slowed noticeably, making it feel as though an invisible weight had been wrapped around every limb. Even attempting to leave the formation through flight proved impossible, as every effort to rise into the air was immediately suppressed by a powerful force that dragged him relentlessly back toward the ground. So this was your plan all along. Leo muttered in a low voice as his gaze slowly shifted toward Morris. The deceiver stood quietly amidst the rain with a wicked smile spread across his face, while Luhan, Dutrask, Clarence, and Terence gradually began circling Leo from every direction. None of them rushed forward recklessly. None of them underestimated his strength. Because every one of them understood that this was the single best opportunity they would ever receive to kill the cult master. And none of them intended to waste it. Meanwhile, above the battlefield, high above the ruined world, Dumpy found himself completely overwhelmed by the Dragon King. Clang, clang, clang. Molthorak's origin teeth crashed repeatedly against Dumpy's divine metal swords as every exchange pushed the swamp frog farther backward through the skies, as despite possessing one of the strongest bloodlines in existence, Dumpy still lacked the experience and raw power possessed by an ancient monster like Molthorak. You're still but a fledgling compared to me, Molthorak declared boldly, as despite being involved in a high-speed battle against Dumpy, the Dragon King still found time to weave spells between the sword strikes, as he launched devastating blasts of dragonfire directly into Dumpy's chest, forcing the frog to defend hurriedly before being thrown backward once again. For several moments, Dumpy fought alone. And for several moments, he lost ground steadily, as the gap between them was simply too large. However, fortunately for him, Vare quickly noticed the situation deteriorating and stepped into the battle without hesitation. Swoosh! A brilliant slash cut across the skies and forced Molthorak to abandon his current attack, as Vare finally joined the battlefield beside Dumpy and helped relieve some of the pressure bearing down upon him. As almost immediately, the situation became significantly more manageable. While neither of them could individually challenge Molthorak head-on, together they were at least capable of slowing him down. And right now, slowing him down was all they needed. Meanwhile, near Caleb. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Leonardo, Anderson Silva, and Mickey James desperately attempted to free Caleb from his restraints. Clang, clang. Their attacks struck the chains repeatedly. However, no matter how much force they applied, the divine restraints simply refused to break. Damn it! What are these things made of? Anderson Silva muttered as frustration gradually crept into his voice. I hit it with my best shot, my most powerful sword slash, and I could not even dent them. Mickey James said, as all eyes turned towards Leonardo, who was their last hope to break the bonds. The two of you move away, I'll give this my best shot. We need to save Caleb fast. Because there's no saying when we might get swept away by a stray blast. Leonardo muttered, as with each passing second the battle around them grew increasingly dangerous. Divine attacks erupted across the battlefield constantly, shockwaves tore apart continents, while the skies themselves seemed moments away from collapsing entirely. And perhaps most terrifying of all, Leo now stood surrounded by multiple gods simultaneously, as even while focusing on freeing Caleb, all three men found themselves repeatedly glancing toward the center of the battlefield, where the outcome of the entire war would likely be decided. Because if Leo fell, then nothing else happening on planet Phoenix Star would matter anymore, as the only option they would have then would be to flee for their lives. Meanwhile, Leo's POV. Leo remained completely calm despite being surrounded by 5 lethal opponents, because among everyone currently standing before him, he knew that only Morris possessed the capability to genuinely threaten his life, while the others, although dangerous to ordinary warriors, did not concern him nearly as much as the formation beneath his feet. Because unlike his enemies, whose abilities and combat styles he already understood, the Crimson Formation continued draining his mana and divine essence with every passing second, making it the single greatest unknown on the battlefield. I've never quite understood the source of confidence that all you cult leaders seem to possess. Because I can swear that if it were anybody else standing where you are right now, surrounded by enemies on all sides while trapped inside a formation specifically designed to weaken them, they would already be trembling in fear. Morris muttered as he slowly circled around Leo alongside the other gods, deliberately attempting to draw the cult master's attention toward, as he hoped that by baiting Leo into a battle of words, he would help create a small opening that Luhan, Dutrask, Clarence, or Terrence could exploit. However, Leo paid him no attention whatsoever. His eyes never lingered on Morris for longer than necessary, while his senses continuously swept across the battlefield, studying every movement, every fluctuation in mana, and every detail surrounding the formation beneath him. Want to know what this formation actually is? Morris continued as he cautiously stepped closer, while the others mirrored his movements and gradually tightened the encirclement. I call it the Web of Lies. It's my greatest creation, and do you know what inspired it? All I needed was a single loyal follower of yours willing to reveal a few secrets. Morris explained while smiling faintly. The tattoos upon your back that convert life essence into usable energy were far more fascinating than I expected. Once I understood their principles, adapting them into a planetary formation became surprisingly simple. The result is what you're standing on now. A formation capable of draining any being possessing divine essence while continuously feeding upon their power. Morris revealed, as he subtly implied that someone close to Leo had betrayed him and leaked cult secrets, as of all the current members of the cult, except himself and Vare, only members of the Skyshard family had access to the Forbidden Dragon moves. Of course, there is one small exception to bypass this formation's grip. Morris continued while lifting one foot slightly from the ground. Special footwear crafted from unique materials that prevents the formation from affecting the wearer. Which is why every member of our alliance is standing here comfortably while you're slowly being drained dry. Morris explained as he watched Leo carefully, clearly hoping that the revelation would provoke some sort of reaction. However, instead, it became the key Leo was looking for to break free of this formation's chokehold. Leap. Leo moved suddenly, as he threw himself sideways and rolled across the shattered battlefield toward Mu Shen's corpse, causing the expressions of every god present to change immediately. Get him! Luhan yelled, as the instant Leo lunged toward Mu Shen's body. Luhan and Dutrask reacted simultaneously and descended upon him from above, the two gods bringing their weapons down with enough force to split continents apart. Swoosh, swoosh. The attacks landed exactly where Leo should have been. However, instead of striking Leo's flesh, both weapons became embedded inside Mu Shen's corpse instead, as Leo effortlessly lifted the dead god and used him as a shield at the final moment. Sputter, sputter. The sight would have been comical under different circumstances. Two gods inadvertently mutilating the body of their former ally while trying to stop Leo from reaching a pair of boots. Yet none of them found it amusing. Because Leo had already succeeded. The moment their weapons became lodged inside the corpse, Leo grabbed the insulated boots and tore them free in one smooth motion before Clarence and Terrence unleashed long-range attacks toward him from opposite directions. Swoosh, swoosh. As the projectiles closed in, Leo crossed his daggers and intercepted both strikes before immediately stepping forward and driving his foot directly into Morris's chest, interrupting the deceiver's own attempt at joining the assault. Boom. The kick forced Morris backward while Leo finally slipped the boots onto his feet, as almost instantly the draining sensation throughout his body disappeared and the weight suppressing his movements vanished entirely. Strength surged back through every limb. His mana flowed normally. His divine essence circulated freely. And for the first time since accidentally setting foot on planet Phoenix Star, Leo found himself capable of expressing his true combat strength once again. Boom! In the very next moment, he launched himself upward and rose above the formation entirely, as the Alliance members could only watch their greatest advantage crumble before their eyes, while Leo unleashed a barrage of strikes their way, as he used the move. 1,000 Phantom Slashes. Meanwhile, Myron, while everyone else focused either on battling the opposing gods directly or attempting to free Caleb from his restraints, Myron chose a different role for himself, as from the very beginning, his eyes remained fixed upon Clarence and Terence. Ever since the humiliation he suffered at Clarence's hands a few years ago, Myron had waited for an opportunity to settle that score, as the memory of that defeat never truly left him despite the years that had passed since then. And now, after enduring Leo's relentless training for years, he finally possessed a skill capable of making that revenge a reality. Because among everything he learned from his father, the most important lesson had been the technique Leo had once used to kill Raymond, which was a technique so devastating that even now Myron could not execute it carelessly without becoming a cripple. Which was precisely why he remained patient. Not yet, I can't reveal my position yet. Myron thought as he carefully suppressed his aura and moved through the ruined battlefield unnoticed, while all around him gods and demigods fought with enough force to tear continents apart. He understood his own limitations better than anyone. Without origin metal weapons, killing a god was unrealistic regardless of how perfectly he executed his attack. However, Clarence and Terence were different. They were still demigods. They were still vulnerable. And most importantly, they were distracted. The moment they stopped paying attention, the moment they exposed their neck to me and are focused on Dad. Myron thought as his eyes narrowed slightly, while he continued inching closer toward the heart of the battlefield despite fully understanding how dangerous that decision was. Because he knew that when the opportunity finally arrived, he would only get one chance to strike. And when that chance came, he intended to make sure neither Clarence nor Terence survived it. Meanwhile, above the surface of planet Phoenix Prime, Dumpy, Vare, and Multhorax POV. After the initial shock of the battle passed and both Dumpy and Vare gradually adjusted to Multhorax's combat rhythm, the momentum of the fight slowly began shifting away from the Dragon King and toward the two cult fighters, as their coordination improved with every passing exchange while their understanding of one another's strengths continued growing throughout the battle. Although Multheric remained individually stronger than either of them, the advantage he initially possessed no longer felt nearly as overwhelming as before, because every time he attempted to pressure one opponent, the other immediately stepped in to exploit the opening created. Ancient Spell, Cosmic Destruction. Multheric declared as he thrust one hand toward the heavens while tremendous quantities of divine essence rapidly gathered above his palm, causing the surrounding skies to darken while violent spatial distortions spread outward from the growing sphere of energy. Womb. The spell expanded rapidly as enough power accumulated within it to devastate entire continents, while even Vare instinctively felt danger alarms screaming within his mind as he watched the attack take shape. However, just as Multheric prepared to release it, Divine Essence Disruption, Dumpy activated his bloodline ability without hesitation, causing the carefully controlled divine essence within the spell to suddenly lose stability. Boom. Instead of flying toward its intended target, the enormous sphere exploded directly within Multhorac's own hand, as violent waves of divine energy erupted outward in every direction, causing the Dragon King's skin to shatter beneath the blast as blood sprayed throughout the skies. Splat. However, as though the spell disruption was not enough, before Multheric could fully recover from the backlash. Void Cleaver. Swoosh. Vare immediately capitalized upon the opening and launched a devastating slash toward the injured Dragon King, as the attack tore through the battlefield and struck Multheric square across the chest. Bah! The Dragon King grunted while spitting a mouthful of blood, as although the attack failed to split him in half, it still carved a deep gash through his armor and flesh, causing blood to pour freely from the wound. The hell? He muttered, as genuine surprise briefly surfaced within his eyes for the first time in centuries. Because this was not a wound inflicted by another god or some ancient rival who had spent a millennia refining their strength. This injury came from two demigods. And somehow, that fact only excited him further. Ha 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 ha. Nice. Now this is what I call a fight. Multheric shouted as he wiped the blood from his lips and immediately burst forward, covering the distance between himself and Dumpy in a single step while his origin teeth descended toward the swamp frog's head with enough force to split mountains apart. Clong. Dumpy barely managed to intercept the strike using both swords simultaneously, as the impact still sent violent shockwaves spreading across the battlefield while the frog's arms trembled beneath the pressure. However, before Moltheric could press his advantage further, Ver immediately joined the exchange and unleashed a series of sword strikes toward the Dragon King's exposed flank. Swish, swish, swish. Each attack forced Moltheric to reposition himself repeatedly, as after personally experiencing the power hidden within Ver's slashes, he no longer dared to casually tank them the way he might have earlier in the fight. In the moment he created distance. Mana nullification. Dumpy activated another bloodline ability, causing the spell Moltheric had begun weaving within his free hand to collapse before it could properly form, as the Dragon King's expression immediately darkened. "Fuck you, frog," he muttered, as for perhaps the first time since obtaining Helmuth's body, he found himself unable to execute his preferred battle rhythm properly. As against Dumpy, every opening he created seemed to immediately become an opportunity for Ver to attack. "You are a piece of swamp trash, you dirty ugly brown frog." Moltheric cursed again, as genuine frustration surfaced within his voice, while his golden eyes remained fixed entirely upon Dumpy. Across the universe, the ancient swamp frogs were known by another title. Dragon Killers. Generations of evolution had shaped their bloodline specifically around disrupting dragons and countering their natural strengths, as the abilities carried by their species seemed almost unfairly designed to interfere with the way dragons fought. And unfortunately for Moltheric, Dumpy represented perhaps the strongest member of that bloodline currently alive. Had Leo himself been standing beside Dumpy right now, Moltheric genuinely believed that the battle might have already become life-threatening. Fortunately for him though, the second opponent was Commander Sparrow rather than Leo. Which meant that despite the difficulties, the battle remained largely even, at least for now. What Moltheric did not realize, however, was that Ver possessed an advantage of his own. Because hidden away within his possession rested one of the Timeless Assassin's legendary daggers, a weapon Leo had entrusted to him for safekeeping long before the battle began. And unlike Dumpy's abilities, which had already been revealed, the dagger remained completely hidden. Ver continued fighting exclusively with his sword while carefully preserving that final trump card, because he understood that if the opportunity to kill Moltheric ever appeared, it would likely come only once. And when that moment arrived, he intended for the strike to be final. "I don't know how I'm going to do it, but somehow, someway, I must push through and kill Moltheric. Leo is already too swamped with facing all the other major threats, so the least I can do to ease his burden is to take this one bastard down." Ver thought to himself, as he momentarily lowered his gaze to the ground below, where he saw Leonardo trying to set Caleb free, while Leo took on 5 opponents alone. "God damn it, Leonardo, free Caleb and get to your uncle fast. He's getting cooked out there," Ver thought, as despite being completely occupied in his own battle, he still could not help but worry for Leo, who was facing astronomical odds. Meanwhile, on the surface of planet Phoenix Prime, Mickey James's paw. Only a few minutes into the battle, and the surface of planet Phoenix Prime already ceased resembling a battlefield, as the harrowed grounds looked less like the surface of a planet and more like the final moments of a dying world. Boom, shudder, swoosh. Catastrophic explosions constantly erupted across the horizon while divine energy tore through the atmosphere overhead, causing the entire planet to shudder violently every few seconds beneath the strain of so many powerful combatants fighting at once. "Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be killed by one of these stray explosions today," Commander Mickey James thought, as despite spending decades serving as one of the cult's most accomplished commanders, he found himself struggling just to remain standing here today. Boom. Another violent shockwave swept across the battlefield at that exact moment, forcing Mickey to dig his heels into the shattered ground to keep from being thrown away, as the terrifying display only reinforced how insignificant he felt amidst a battle being fought by beings who could casually destroy planets. Yet while he found himself constantly worrying about surviving the next explosion, the men beside him appeared remarkably composed, as Caleb remained focused entirely on breaking free from his restraints while Anderson Silva continued attacking the divine chains relentlessly, showing no sign of panic despite the fact that a single stray attack from the gods fighting nearby could erase all 3 of them from existence. Mickey tried to focus on helping them, however his attention kept drifting toward Leonardo, as there was something about the demigod's behavior that increasingly bothered him the longer the battle dragged on. At first he could not quite explain what felt wrong. Leonardo was helping. His attacks landed cleanly against the restraints. His positioning remained perfect, and from the outside, he appeared fully committed to freeing Caleb. Yet the more Mickey observed him, the more he felt as though something beneath the surface did not add up, because while Leonardo's blade continuously struck the chains with frightening precision, his eyes rarely remained focused on Caleb for long before drifting back toward the larger battle taking place nearby. Again and again, Mickey caught him watching Leo. Again and again, he noticed Leonardo tracking the movements of the gods surrounding the cult master rather than concentrating on the task directly in front of him. What are you looking at? Mickey wondered as a growing sense of unease settled inside his chest, because although he desperately wanted to dismiss the thought as paranoia, the longer he watched, the harder it became to ignore the feeling that Leonardo's real attention was somewhere else entirely. Clong! Another strike landed against the restraints, as cracks spread rapidly through the divine metal before 2 of the 4 chains finally shattered apart, causing broken fragments to scatter across the battlefield. Shatter! Seeing that progress immediately lifted Mickey's spirits. At this pace Caleb would be free soon. A little longer. A few more successful strikes. Then they could finally get away from this cursed spot before one of the gods accidentally killed them all. However, just as that thought crossed his mind, Leonardo suddenly stopped. The demigod stood motionless for a brief moment while staring toward the battlefield in the distance, as though something had finally happened that demanded his attention, before unexpectedly turning around and breaking into a sprint. Leonardo, what are you doing? We can't free Caleb on our own. Anderson Silva shouted as confusion and frustration immediately surfaced within his voice. However, Leonardo offered no response whatsoever and continued running forward as though he had never heard the warning. Elder cousin, Caleb shouted as even he appeared genuinely caught off guard by the sudden decision. Yet once again, Leonardo failed to answer. Instead, he accelerated even further, as though every second suddenly mattered, while his eyes remained locked upon the battlefield ahead with a level of focus that Mickey had never seen from him before. The sight immediately made his stomach sink. Because this was not how someone looked when rushing to help an ally. This was how someone looked when they had already made a decision and were prepared to see it through regardless of the consequences. And for reasons he could not properly explain, the longer Mickey watched Leonardo run, the stronger the feeling became that something had gone terribly wrong. What are you even doing? Mickey James shouted last, as at that moment, he suddenly noticed the demigod reach into his inventory and pull out a weapon that immediately made his blood run cold. It was a dagger. A lusterless dagger unlike anything Mickey had ever seen Leonardo carry before, as even from this distance the weapon radiated a terrifying aura that instinctively made him understand it was not made of a normal metal. Caleb, since when does your uncle carry a dagger? Mickey James asked in a panicked voice, as at that moment, Caleb suddenly felt an irrational fear run through his body. Was cousin approached by Morris too? Caleb wondered, as standing here now, he could not dismiss the possibility that just like him and Myron, Leonardo might have been visited by Morris too. No, Caleb thought as disbelief washed over him. Please tell me that's not what this looks like. He thought, yet no matter how desperately he searched for another explanation, his eyes continued showing him the same horrifying reality. Leonardo was sprinting directly toward Leo. The dagger remained firmly gripped in his hand. And the cult master currently had his back turned while fighting multiple opponents at once. As for the first time since arriving on planet Phoenix Prime, genuine panic gripped Caleb, as every instinct he possessed screamed that something terrible was about to happen, while years of trust and loyalty left him completely unable to decide whether he was witnessing a betrayal or the greatest misunderstanding of his life. And so alongside Mickey James and Anderson Silva, he could do nothing except watch the scene unfold and pray that Leonardo was not about to do what it looked like he was about to do. Meanwhile, Leonardo's POV. Leonardo could barely control his own muscles as he sprinted across the ruined battlefield, as the fear coursing through his body steadily became greater than the discipline that had guided him as a warrior throughout his entire life. The dagger given to him by Morris felt unusually heavy within his hand. Every step felt wrong. Every instinct inside his body screamed at him to stop. Because what he was about to do would either become the greatest mistake he had ever made, or the decision that saved him from a future filled with endless pain and inevitable death. Forgive me for this, uncle. Leonardo thought as he continued running. Because just as Morris had explained to him months ago upon planet Granada, the true trap only began once Leo obtained the boots. And now that he had finally done exactly that, everything was proceeding according to plan. Planet Granada, several months ago. So how exactly do you plan to kill my uncle? He is not dumb enough to fall for some common scheme, you know. Leonardo asked as thunder rumbled across the skies overhead, while a slow, disgusting smile spread across Morris's face. I can already envision exactly how it's going to happen. Morris replied as he slowly began pacing across the wet stone beneath his feet. First, I am going to lure Skyshard into a formation specifically designed to drain divine essence the moment he steps onto it. Morris explained as rainwater dripped from his bare chest. Once trapped inside it, his mobility will be reduced significantly, while his ability to travel through the fourth dimension and use seconds walk will become completely restricted. He continued as he casually traced circles into the wet ground using the tip of his toe. Even under those conditions, I still fully expect him to put up an incredible fight. I've seen that boy move, and I know that he's even more fearsome than Soren or the Timeless Assassin, so I won't make the mistake of underestimating him. Morris admitted as genuine respect briefly flickered within his eyes. However, he will still lose, because the real trap won't be in the formation, but something else entirely. Morris continued as his smile widened further. Even with his back against the wall, I can see Skyshard taking down at least one of us. I don't know whether it will be Luhan, Dutrask, Clarence, Terrence, or Multheric. And frankly speaking, I don't particularly care. He explained as he lazily waved one hand dismissively. What matters is that, when one of us dies, the first thing Skyshard will do afterwards is try and steal the boots we all would be wearing, because by then, I would have already led him to believe that the boots are the key to escaping the formation's restrictions, making it the only logical decision for him to make. Morris muttered as amusement surfaced within his expression. He'll steal them. The deceiver concluded as though the outcome was already guaranteed. And once he does, he'll feel the restrictions vanish. His mana will flow normally. His divine essence will stabilize and his confidence will return. Morris explained as he slowly raised one finger into the air. And that is the precise moment when the true trap begins. He finished as thunder exploded overhead. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Morris reached into his robes and produced a black dagger. The weapon looked completely ordinary. Yet the moment Leonardo saw it, an uncomfortable feeling settled within his chest. This dagger is coated with the most corrosive poison I have ever created. Morris revealed as he carefully handed the weapon over. It cannot kill a god. It cannot permanently cripple a god. However, it can interfere with regeneration, and for a demigod like Skyshard, it can be lethal. He explained as Leonardo accepted the dagger cautiously. Even for someone like Skyshard, who has the cult's secret healing methods at his disposal, this poison will slow that healing by roughly a factor of 10 for a brief period of time. Morris continued as he folded his hands behind his back. So what you need to do is, when you see Skyshard wear those boots, you need to start approaching him from behind with this dagger in hand. He muttered as he resumed pacing across the rain-soaked stone. You will need to suppress your killing intent, because if you are openly hostile from the very start then Skyshard will sense the betrayal coming, so you need to think about anything except Skyshard. And because you are his nephew, and because he trusts you completely, he will never suspect the intention behind your approach. Morris explained as Leonardo felt his heartbeat steadily accelerate. You will continue closing the distance until you reach roughly 20 meters. He continued as his voice gradually became colder. And at that exact moment, I will activate the formation's secondary function. Morris explained as his eyes gleamed dangerously. The boots are merely a decoy. Their purpose is to convince Skyshard that he has solved the puzzle. He muttered as a wide grin spread across his face. While the real function of the formation is something else entirely. Morris concluded, as Leonardo felt his stomach tighten. The moment I activate it, everyone standing upon that battlefield with the special boots will become trapped. Morris revealed as he slowly raised both hands outward. Skyshard, the Alliance gods, Multheric. Everyone, but you and me. Morris said as he pointed directly toward Leonardo. And you shall use that opportunity to sever both of Skyshard's legs in one strike. He concluded, as Leonardo felt a shiver run down his spine. Sever my uncle's legs? He asked, his voice cracking, as Morris nodded calmly. Yes, you will attack him from below, and while he struggles to understand what just happened, I will descend from above and decapitate his head. Morris concluded as though he were describing something mundane. Together, we will kill the cult master. He said, as for several long moments, Leonardo remained completely silent. Then Morris produced one final item. A soul contract. The parchment slowly slid across the stone until it stopped directly before Leonardo. Sign it, Morris said as his expression finally lost all traces of amusement. I need certainty that you won't attempt to deceive me. He continued while staring directly into Leonardo's eyes. The contract ends the moment you sever Skyshard's legs. Morris explained as lightning illuminated the skies behind him. Succeed, and you walk away free. He continued calmly. Fail, Morris muttered as a dangerous smile slowly spread across his face. And the contract will kill you instantly for violating its terms. He concluded as silence settled between them once again. Leonardo stared down at the parchment. Then at the dagger. Then toward the ruined remains of his missing arm, before eventually, with a trembling hand and a heart filled with uncertainty, reaching forward and signing his name. Meanwhile, Leo's POV. Leo remained completely focused on the enemies surrounding him, as after obtaining the insulated boots and freeing himself from the formation's initial restrictions, he immediately began searching for the quickest way to reduce the enemy's numbers while the momentum still remained on his side. Among everyone currently standing before him, Dutrask attracted the most attention, as despite doing his best to hide it, the injured god's fear of close combat became obvious the longer the battle continued. I think after Soren carved him up, Dutrask has grown a fear of fighting at close range. Leo concluded, as he searched for a way to get close to Dutrask, while avoiding being interrupted by the others. However, while his attention remained fixed upon the enemies in front of him, Leonardo gradually closed the distance from behind, as the demigod moved across the ruined battlefield with the black dagger concealed in his hand while suppressing every trace of hostility that could potentially reveal his intentions. Naturally, Leo sensed him approaching. Yet despite noticing Leonardo's presence, he paid it little attention, because among everyone currently fighting on planet Phoenix Prime, his nephew was one of the very few people whom he genuinely trusted with his life. Which was why, what happened next surprised even him, as, just as he was about to make his move and charge towards Dutrask, he suddenly felt immobilized once more, as his whole body felt as heavy as a mountain. What? He wondered in shock, as around him, the other gods also seemed to be facing the same problem, as for a moment it seemed like everyone had become collectively immobilized. Everyone except Morris and Leonardo, as it was only now that Leo saw the full picture. So the shoe was the real trap. Leo realized as his eyes widened slightly. However, before he could do anything about the trap, one attack came towards him from below, while another came from above. Slash. Slash. Block. Realizing that he could not block both attacks, Leo chose to save his life first, as of the two attacks coming his way he chose to block Morris's one first. Clang. Without hesitation, Leo crossed both origin daggers above his head and intercepted Morris's descending strike, as sparks erupted in every direction while the force of the collision shattered the ground beneath his feet and sent violent shockwaves across the battlefield. However, while he successfully protected his neck, slash. Leonardo's dagger completed its trajectory, as his own nephew slashed through his legs, above the special boots and below the knee, as Leo lost his balance and tumbled forward, while his sliced open legs spurt out blood in rapid bursts. Splat. Thud. Falling on his knees, Leo lost his battle stance, as for a moment, he became vulnerable to a life-ending attack, as Morris smiled and said, "You were an entertaining opponent, Skyshard, and I will miss you a lot after you die. However, I guess this is goodbye. I bet you never saw this double cross coming. So in the end, all I want to say to you is that, this final strike is presented to you, courtesy of the deceiver Morris." Morris muttered as he plunged the blade downward with everything he had. However, just as victory seemed guaranteed, an unexpected development suddenly took place. Clang. The origin dagger in his hand stopped inches away from Leo's chest as, for a brief moment, Morris failed to understand what went wrong. Huh. The deceiver muttered in surprise, as he looked at the man that had blocked him, and was shocked to see that it was the one-armed Leonardo who was saving his uncle's life. "Boy, what the hell are you doing?" Morris muttered, as the color slowly drained from his face, as he could not understand Leonardo's current actions at all. After all, Leonardo was the same individual who had double-crossed the cult and sliced off Leo's legs just a couple seconds ago. "You've signed a soul contract to me, boy. You will die if you double-cross me." Morris muttered as genuine confusion surfaced across his face. However, Leonardo simply responded with a trembling smile. "The soul contract ended the moment I sliced off my uncle's legs. So as of this moment, I'm no longer bound to you." Leonardo muttered, as despite the overwhelming force bearing down upon him, he refused to yield even a single inch, and instead used the move immobilizing chains to restrict both his own and Morris's movement. "No, this can't be." Morris muttered as he saw his perfect plan crumbling before his own eyes, as despite being this close to success, in the end he failed to taste victory. Meanwhile, a faint smile slowly appeared across Leonardo's face. It was the relieved smile of a man who had finally survived the most dangerous gamble of his entire life. While at that exact moment, Leo regrew his legs and disappeared, as defying Morris's expectations of demigod-level regeneration, Leo instead used God-level healing to tap into the law of time and return the state of his body to a moment before his legs were chopped off, as he corrected the damage done to him, as though it never happened at all. Seconds walk. Morris looked at him regenerate his legs in sheer surprise, as despite the battle dragging on for so long, he never once realized that Leo had already broken through to godhood, as never once did Leo reveal the extent of his true power. Skyshard is a god. But when? Morris wondered in surprise, as no matter how he tried to think about it, his brain simply failed to comprehend as to how a demigod could ascend to godhood in under a decade, As of all the variables he planned for before this fight began, this was a possibility that he did not even consider. As in the end, although he tried to desperately save his life by turning around and blocking the move, Leo's speed proved to be far superior to his own. As with Leonardo slowing him down with his chains, Leo's dagger ultimately sliced through his neck clean. Shing! Morris's head separated from his body, the deceiver's final expression remaining locked in confusion, as till the end he could not understand as to why Leonardo would double-cross him after giving him everything that he wanted. As at that moment, Leo's face finally entered his field of vision, with the cult master explaining to him as to where he went wrong. You really thought you were the only one capable of planning ahead? Leo questioned calmly as he looked down toward the deceiver's severed head. You really thought you could turn my own nephew against me? Leo continued as Leonardo finally released the breath he had been holding since the battle began. Of course you thought you could, because a man without principles like you with no family and nobody to trust your life to, can never understand the power of trust and familial bonds. And that's why you failed. Because unlike you, my nephew is not a selfish piece of scum. I arranged for you to meet him. I arranged for him to betray me. From the very start you were dancing in my palms. Because although you think yourself to be the smartest individual in the universe, your flaw is that you can never envision your opponent trusting their back to another, because you can never do it yourself. So in the end, that's how I beat you. I beat you by trusting my nephew to be smart enough to walk into your trap, and still find a way to save me, which he did. Leo said, as he stomped down on Morris with his instantly regenerated feet, as in the end, Leo did not even let the deceiver die with that disgusting teeth of his intact and instead, he stomped it out, to leave Morris as a broken and mangled piece of corpse. I know you find sadistic joy in breaking families and double-crossing allies, however, that's not how things go down today. Today, you lose. Because, in the end, this double cross was brought to you by the cult of Ascension, you lying sack of shit. Leo concluded as across the battlefield, the remaining gods finally realized that the greatest deception of the war had never belonged to Morris at all, but rather to Leo Skyshard, who had always been 2 steps ahead. A few months ago, the Eternal Garden, Leo and Leonardo's POV. Only a few days after learning that Morris had personally approached Caleb, Leo summoned Leonardo to the Eternal Garden for a private conversation, as although he trusted both Caleb and Myron completely, he also understood that the deceiver was not the sort of man who abandoned a scheme after just a couple failed attempts. If Morris failed to turn Caleb against the cult, then he would simply move on to somebody else, while if he failed to turn Myron as well, then he would continue searching until eventually he found a person willing to play the role he needed. As far as Leo was concerned, it made little difference whether that process took 5 years, 10 years, or even longer, because as long as Morris remained alive, he would continue probing for weaknesses until he finally found one. And that possibility was precisely what troubled Leo the most, because while he trusted his family and commanders today, nobody could predict what the future might look like decades down the line. Circumstances changed, people changed, and Morris excelled at exploiting moments of weakness better than anyone else in the universe, which was why Leo planned for a contingency today. Sometime in the future, it is my understanding that Morris will eventually approach you as well, and when he does, I want you to agree to his proposal and become a part of whatever plan he presents to you. Leo instructed as the color instantly drained from Leonardo's face. You want me to become a part of his plan? What are you saying, uncle? I don't want anything to do with the deceiver's schemes. I'm loyal to you and the cult. You're my uncle, my flesh and blood. Leonardo replied as genuine panic surfaced within his voice, because even pretending to entertain such an idea felt dangerously close to betrayal. I'm loyal to you and the cult. You're my uncle, my flesh and blood. Leonardo replied as genuine panic surfaced within his voice, because even pretending to entertain such an idea felt dangerously close to betrayal. However, Leo simply stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand upon his shoulder, as though the concern Leonardo felt was something he had expected from the very beginning. Of course you're loyal to me, my boy, and that's exactly why it needs to be you. Leo replied as he looked directly into Leonardo's eyes. Morris won't stop searching until he finds somebody willing to play the role he needs, because the final battle will only happen once every piece is in place. If we don't give him what he needs right now, he might come after my unborn grandson next, because that bastard won't mind waiting for 10 years, if he can manipulate a child to bring down the cult. So our options are that either you give him what he wants, or we wait and see which of our trusted men betray us. Leo explained as his expression gradually grew more serious. So rather than waiting for Morris to eventually find somebody who genuinely hates us, I'd rather give him somebody I trust completely, because if the deceiver is determined to recruit a traitor, then I'd prefer that traitor to be one of my own choosing. Leo concluded as Leonardo felt his heart sink at those words. Because the implications behind the plan became clear almost immediately, as accepting this role meant willingly stepping into the most dangerous position imaginable. If things went wrong, then regardless of his true intentions, history itself might remember him as another Caliph, while countless people across the universe would curse his name for generations to come. Uncle, that's an enormous amount of trust you're placing in me. Leonardo muttered as uncertainty surfaced across his face. What if Morris forces me to sign a soul contract? What if he leaves me with no way out of whatever scheme he's planning? He questioned as Leo unexpectedly smiled. Then sign it. Leo replied calmly. If he presents you with a soul contract, then sign it without hesitation, because regardless of what contract he creates, I trust that when the moment comes, you'll find a way to do the right thing. I trust your judgment, I trust your loyalty, and most importantly, I trust that you'll find a path forward even when I can't see one myself. Leo said as he squeezed Leonardo's shoulder firmly. Those words struck Leonardo harder than any battlefield wound ever could, because this was not simply an order being passed down from leader to subordinate. Leo was placing the future of the cult, the safety of his family, and potentially even his own life into Leonardo's hands without demanding guarantees or assurances in return. All right, uncle, I'll do my best, Leonardo promised as despite the fear lingering within his chest, he ultimately nodded his head in agreement, as immediately afterward, Leo pulled him into a hug. That's all I ask, Leo replied as a faint smile appeared across his face. What neither of them could have ever dreamed of, however, was just how quickly Leo's prediction would prove accurate, because only a few days later, exactly as expected, Morris approached Leonardo and attempted to recruit him into a conspiracy against the cult. Yet throughout that entire exchange, the deceiver fundamentally misunderstood the position he occupied, because while he believed himself to be manipulating Leonardo into becoming his pawn, the reality was that Leonardo entered those negotiations with a completely different objective already fixed inside his mind. From the moment Leo entrusted him with this responsibility, Leonardo's goal never changed. He intended to protect his family, protect the cult, and ensure that when the decisive battle finally arrived, Morris's greatest scheme would ultimately become the instrument of his own destruction. Which was why, when Morris eventually placed the soul contract before him and demanded his signature, Leonardo accepted without resistance and carefully studied every condition written upon the agreement before signing his name. Because the moment he finished reading the contract, he immediately noticed the flaw hidden within its wording, as Morris had tied the completion clause to a single action rather than the overall success of the plan itself. The contract did not require Leo's death, nor did it require the Alliance to win the battle, as all it demanded from Leonardo was that he successfully sever Leo's legs during the decisive confrontation. And that was precisely why he signed it. Because from the moment that condition was fulfilled, the contract would lose all authority over him, leaving him completely free to act according to his own conscience once again. And so, while Morris viewed the agreement as an ironclad guarantee of loyalty, Leonardo viewed it as a temporary prison that he only needed to endure until the correct moment arrived. Because if he succeeded in his plan, then by the time the deceiver realized the mistake, it would already be too late, because Leo would have already made him pay for his arrogance. The battlefield of Planet Phoenix Prime. The death of Morris stunned every god present upon the battlefield, as watching the deceiver lose his head so suddenly forced them to confront two extremely uncomfortable truths that none of them were prepared to accept. The first realization was that Morris had been completely outplayed. They had not been privy to what exactly he had been plotting over the past few months, however, they had been told not to worry about it. However, seeing as how he was dead now, they could not help but worry, as the architect behind their entire scheme had fallen victim to a counterplot he never saw coming, taking with him the backbone of the Alliance's strategy. At the same time, Leo calmly bent down and retrieved Grudgekeeper from beside Morris's corpse, as with the second Origin dagger now resting firmly within his grasp, the Alliance suddenly found itself without a single piece of Origin metal capable of threatening him. As that thought tied into the second realization, that was even more terrifying than the first, which was the fact that Leo's Skyshard was now a god. The regeneration Leo displayed moments earlier was not something a demigod should have been capable of performing, as restoring severed limbs instantly through manipulation of the law of time was a feat that belonged exclusively to the true god realm. And hence, as they acknowledged his godhood, a cold chill spread through the hearts of the remaining Alliance members as they realized that they were fucked. Unfortunately for them, however, their nightmare was only beginning, as at that very moment. Swoosh. While everyone's attention remained fixed upon Leo and Morris's corpse, another figure suddenly burst across the battlefield at terrifying speed, as Myron finally abandoned the patience he had maintained throughout the entire war and launched the attack he had been waiting to unleash. Temporal shift. Clarence sensed the danger at the very last possible moment. Instinct screamed at him that the attack was aimed toward the back of his neck, causing him to react immediately and shift his body while raising his weapon defensively, as he desperately attempted to protect the area he believed Myron intended to strike. However, that assumption proved fatal, as Myron faked his intent, and did not actually target the neck, as Shing. The blade swept cleanly through Clarence's torso before the demigod could react properly, as his body separated into two perfect halves while the upper portion slowly slid away from the lower one and collapsed onto the ruined battlefield below. For several moments, Clarence simply stared at Myron in complete disbelief, as his mind struggled to comprehend how a monarch had managed to kill him so cleanly. "I told you I'd get you one of these days," Myron muttered as satisfaction surfaced within his eyes while watching the man responsible for his humiliation finally fall. Meanwhile, Clarence felt hatred surge through his heart in his final thoughts. Because if not for Morris's stupid formation immobilizing him alongside everyone else, there was no universe where Myron should have been capable of landing that attack. "Damn you, Myron Skyshard," Clarence muttered as his consciousness finally faded away, at which point, genuine panic gripped the battlefield. Luhan, Dutrask, and Terence immediately realized that remaining here meant certain death, as all three of them abandoned any remaining desire to continue fighting and instead focused entirely on trying to escape. RIP. Using brute force, they tore apart the enchanted boots binding them to the formation and immediately began retreating, as none of them possessed the courage to remain on the battlefield any longer and test themselves against Leo. "You can run to the edge of the universe and I will still hunt you down. Your best odds are to stand up against me now, because one-on-one, you can't take me down," Leo warned as his voice echoed across the shattered world beneath them, with the threat immediately causing Luhan and Dutrask to exchange nervous glances. "He can't catch both of us," Luhan muttered as desperation surfaced within his expression. "We split up and opened separate fourth-dimensional tunnels," Dutrask replied as he quickly nodded in agreement. "Whoever escapes, escapes," he concluded as both gods simultaneously opened portals and fled in opposite directions. Naturally, Leo chose his target immediately. FSHHHH. Without the slightest hesitation, he stepped through Luhan's portal and vanished into the fourth dimension, leaving Dutrask behind for another day. Inside the endless void between worlds, Luhan pushed the laws of space to their absolute limits while desperately attempting to widen the distance separating himself from Leo, as survival became the only thing occupying his mind. However, unfortunately for him, he was running from the single worst opponent imaginable. Because while Luhan merely understood the laws of space, Leo had already mastered them. The distance separating them rapidly collapsed as Leo effortlessly followed the traces left behind within the fourth dimension, before eventually cornering the fleeing god with nowhere left to run. "Please wait, we can still negotiate," Luhan begged, as fear flooded his eyes. However, against God Leo, he never stood a chance, as Leo swept the floor with him and used Boss's execution to end his life. Shing. The origin dagger swept through Luhan's neck in one flawless motion, severing his head before the god could beg for mercy, as another corpse drifted silently through the endless void. And just like that, the once mighty Great Clan Alliance was now reduced to a single surviving god. As by the end of the final war, the New Age Alliance collapsed completely. At the same time, back on planet Phoenix Prime, Terence, who had never learnt the secret to dimensional travel, immediately lowered his weapon and surrendered, as he placed his arms behind his neck, and prostrated himself on the ground, begging for mercy, as he understood that alone, he could not take the remaining cult forces down. As under Leonardo's supervision, the demigod was spared and taken hostage. Meanwhile, above the battlefield, Dumpy, Vare, and Molthorax POV. The longer the battle between the three of them continued, the more Vare realized that despite acknowledging him as a threat, Moltharic never truly viewed him as the deciding factor in this fight, as throughout every exchange the Dragon King's attention inevitably gravitated back toward Dumpy, while treating him as little more than a side character. And although the realization bruised his pride somewhat, Vare quickly recognized the opportunity that hid within it, as while Moltharic remained focused upon the ancient swamp frog, he still had a chance to manipulate the battlefield in a way that favored the cult. "Dragon King, I feel like you want to settle this fight one-on-one with the frog while I am simply getting in your way. So how about this? Finish me off first, then turn your full attention toward Dumpy. If you look below us, Leo has already killed Morris, which means that sooner or later he will return here as well. So if you don't want this battle turning into a 3 against 1, then I suggest you kill me quickly and deal with the frog afterward." Vare proposed as he lowered his sword slightly and stared directly into Molthorak's eyes. For a moment, Moltheric looked stunned, as though not expecting this sudden challenge, before eventually breaking into a smile. Very well. I do admire your courage, human, and so I shall reward it by killing you first. Moltheric replied as he immediately accelerated forward, crossing the distance between them in an instant while bringing his origin teeth weapon down toward Ver with overwhelming force. Clang. Their weapons collided, as Moltheric immediately reset his stance, while Ver briefly glanced toward Dumpy, as the two exchanged a knowing glance. Deep within his heart, Ver knew this was an unnecessary risk, because after Morris's death it was only a matter of time before Leo finished hunting down the remaining gods and returned to assist them. However, despite knowing that help was coming, he still chose to take this gamble because he had gradually come to understand that he could not spend the rest of his life relying upon Leo to solve every problem placed before him. As the dragon of the cult, there were battles that he needed to win himself, and this here was one such battle. Clang. Using Enhance, Ver temporarily pushed his physical strength beyond its normal limits and met Moltheric head-on, as sword and blade collided repeatedly across the skies while shockwaves erupted outward from every exchange. For several moments he successfully matched the Dragon King blow for blow, however the gap in raw power eventually became impossible to overcome, as Moltheric's superior strength gradually overwhelmed him before finally launching him backward through the skies. Boom! Ver crashed through several layers of clouds before stabilizing himself, as Moltheric immediately attempted to capitalize upon the advantage. Ancient spell, Dragon Chomp. Moltheric declared as enormous quantities of divine essence gathered within his palm while the surrounding space distorted beneath the pressure of the forming spell. However, just as the attack neared completion, divine essence disruption, Dumpy activated his bloodline ability without hesitation, causing the carefully controlled spell structure to immediately collapse. Boom! The explosion detonated directly within Moltheric's hand, throwing the Dragon King off balance while violent waves of divine energy swept across the battlefield. As making the most of the opening, Ver charged forward. Storm Flash Traverse. Swoosh. Ver vanished from his previous location and appeared beside Moltheric almost instantly, as his sword swept downward in a trajectory that seemed aimed directly at the Dragon King's leg. Instinctively, Moltheric shifted his defense, only to realize too late that the attack had never been targeting his leg at all. Shing! The blade cut cleanly through his arm instead. Blood erupted into the skies as the severed limb tumbled downward, however the injury itself failed to concern Moltheric in the slightest, as within moments the missing arm regenerated completely. Mortal weapons don't work on me. I thought you knew that already. Moltheric muttered as he immediately renewed his assault and surged toward Ver once more, completely intent on finishing the swordsman before turning his attention back toward Dumpy. However, unfortunately for him, while his focus remained fixed entirely upon Ver, the true threat had already begun moving into position behind him. The setup had occurred moments earlier when Moltheric's spell detonated within his own palm, as before charging forward to capitalize on the opening, Ver had discreetly tossed the timeless assassin's origin dagger toward Dumpy, allowing the swamp frog to quietly take over the role of executioner while he occupied the Dragon King's attention. And that plan unfolded exactly as intended. As after concealing both his presence and the weapon using mana nullification, Dumpy gradually closed the distance without attracting the slightest suspicion, until eventually he arrived directly behind Moltheric while the Dragon King's entire focus remained locked upon Ver. Thrust. The origin dagger plunged deep into Moltheric's back, as for the first time since the battle began, genuine shock surfaced across the Dragon King's face, while he struggled to understand how Dumpy had reached him unnoticed and when exactly the swamp frog had obtained an origin weapon. Unfortunately, he would never receive an answer. Because unlike ordinary weapons, the dagger immediately began carving through his body from within. Slash, slash, slash. Dumpy showed absolutely no mercy as he tore through organ after organ with ruthless efficiency, turning what should have been an instantly fatal wound into a slow and agonizing death. Cowards. Attacking me from behind like this. You have no integrity. Moltheric muttered as blood spilled continuously from his mouth while his strength rapidly faded. However, Ver met his gaze without the slightest trace of sympathy. You were allied to the cult once, yet you still chose to raise your sword against us. If anybody here lacks integrity, it is you, Dragon King. So die honorably and don't make this any uglier than it already is. Ver replied as he slowly lowered his sword and watched the final moments unfold. At that point, even Moltheric understood that the battle was over. The origin dagger had already done irreversible damage, and hence, he simply smiled and chuckled, before saying, "Very well, if I'm about to die, then I, Moltheric, declare my killer the next beast king of this universe." he declared, as at those words, Dumpy stepped forward and drove the dagger straight through Multhorak's heart. Shing! The Dragon King's body stiffened momentarily before all strength finally left him, as the ancient god slowly collapsed from the skies and began his descent toward the shattered world below. As just like that, the battle above planet Phoenix Prime finally came to an end, with the legend of the Dragon King coming to a close. A few minutes after the battle, Myron's POV. Myron chuckled like a fool as he watched Terence kneeling before Leonardo with his hands raised in surrender, because with Morris and Clarence dead, Multhorak defeated and Luhan executed, the cult had officially won the war. After 2 millennia of struggle, countless sacrifices, and enough betrayals to fill an entire history book, they had finally done it. They were the new masters of the universe. Holy shit, big cousin, we did it. We actually won. For a moment there, I was too stunned to move when I saw you chop off father's legs, as I thought, damn, has big cousin betrayed us? I swear I felt my heart break into a million pieces right there. But then you saved father's life and showed that you weren't a traitor after all, and I instantly felt relief flood through my senses. But boy, oh boy, for a second did you have me. Myron said as he pointed accusingly toward Leonardo. Yeah, for a minute there, I felt like I was about to lose control of my own dagger, as those few seconds where I betrayed Uncle were definitely the most stressful moments of my life. Thankfully it all worked out for the best, because otherwise I wouldn't have had a face left to show any of you. Leonardo replied as he chuckled nervously while rubbing the back of his neck. The response immediately caused Myron to burst out laughing, as the tension that had gripped his body throughout the battle finally began to fade away. At the same time, Caleb, Anderson Silva, and Mickey James slowly made their way toward the duo with wide smiles plastered across their faces, as all 3 men looked considerably more relaxed than they had only a few minutes ago. Hey, look who's finally free from his bonds. Good to see you again, big brother. Myron said as Caleb smiled warmly and pulled him into a tight hug. The 2 brothers patted each other's backs repeatedly while grinning like complete fools, as despite everything they had endured throughout the war, they were both still alive. And right now, that was enough. Meanwhile, Anderson Silva and Mickey James exchanged amused looks. I'm not going to lie, I was 1 second away from attacking you. Anderson Silva admitted as he looked toward Leonardo. Same, Mickey James added as he nodded immediately. I spent 5 whole minutes convincing myself that I was imagining things, and then you pulled out that dagger and started running toward the cult master. He said as Leonardo groaned. Trust me, I wasn't enjoying any part of it either. Leonardo replied as everyone around him laughed, when suddenly, FWOOOSH. A 4th-dimensional tunnel opened nearby, as Leo finally returned after hunting down Luhan. The cult master stepped onto the battlefield calmly while carrying Grudgekeeper in one hand, as his gaze immediately swept across the battlefield to assess the situation. Naturally, the first thing he searched for was Multhorak. However, much to his surprise, it appeared that Dumpy and Ver had already resolved the situation, because high above the battlefield, the 2 of them already looked relaxed and joyful. Look who's here. The new master of the universe. Ver shouted as he pointed dramatically toward Leo while descending from the skies, as Leo could only let out a half-amused chuckle at the declaration, as for the first time since the battle began, the atmosphere amongst the group finally turned genuinely lighthearted. Do you know what Multhorak crowned this ugly frog before he died? Ver asked as he pointed toward Dumpy while struggling to contain his laughter. He said, I, King Multhorak, declare you the next king of beasts. Ver continued as he chuckled heartily. So in that case, I, General Sparrow, declare you, Cult Master Leo Skyshard, the new Emperor of the Universe. He announced dramatically as both he and Dumpy finally landed upon the shattered surface of planet Phoenix Prime. The declaration immediately caused laughter to spread through the gathered group, as even Leo found himself letting out a half-amused chuckle while shaking his head. For several minutes afterward, Leo simply allowed the conversation to flow naturally amongst his warriors, as the survivors exchanged stories, laughed about near disasters, and celebrated the fact that against all odds, they had somehow emerged victorious. After everything they had endured together, they deserved at least a few moments of peace. Eventually, however, it was Ver who noticed something that felt slightly off. What happened, Cult Master? Why are you not smiling? We won, didn't we? Ver asked as his smile slowly faded. Well, we did, but there is still the matter of hunting down Dutrask, so technically the job isn't finished yet. Leo replied as he folded his arms across his chest. Ah, live a little. We'll get that bastard sooner or later. Him alone is no longer a threat to the organization. Ver replied as he waved his hand dismissively while several others nodded in agreement. True. But it isn't Dutrask that worries me. Leo admitted as his expression only seemed to grow more serious, which caused the celebrations to quickly die down, as everyone turned toward Leo and waited for him to elaborate. All right, Leo muttered as he clapped his hands together once, and summoned a row of chairs from the shattered earth below, forming a circle amidst the devastated battlefield. I have something important to tell all of you, so sit down and let me explain, because what I'm about to say will probably stun most of you. Leo said as the others slowly obeyed. Although nobody knew exactly where the conversation was heading, many of them already felt a strange premonition forming inside their hearts that whatever Leo was about to reveal was not going to be minor. For several moments, Leo remained silent. He looked toward the skies above planet Phoenix Prime, closed his eyes briefly, and carefully organized his thoughts before eventually letting out a deep sigh and turning toward his family and most trusted commanders. What I am about to reveal must remain a secret that all of you take to your graves, because the success or failure of my final plan depends entirely upon the people sitting before me right now. Leo began, as his declaration instantly caused everyone to turn absolutely serious. Quote. Years ago, I had a conversation with Chaosbringer. During that conversation, he asked me what I believed was the single factor holding the cult together. At the time, I answered that it was our shared dream that united us. I believed that our desire to restore the cult to its former glory was what bound us as a people. However, Chaosbringer disagreed. According to him, what truly united us was not our dream, but rather the suffering we endured together at the hands of the righteous alliance that became the social glue holding us together. Leo explained as several people visibly straightened in their seats while old memories resurfaced within his mind. Back then, I dismissed his opinion. However, after watching the rise of the fundamentalist faction, I gradually realized that he was right. Our people at our core are too divided. Some are liberals, some are hardliners, and the only reason we stay together is because we had a shared enemy. So, now that the righteous alliance is gone and our eventual conquest of the rainbow stream is all but guaranteed, we need to confront a very uncomfortable reality. That without a common enemy to rally around, the cult will slowly begin tearing itself apart. Leo continued as the statement immediately caused Myron to raise his hand. However, before he could speak, Leo simply gestured for him to remain silent. I know what you're about to say, but hear me out first. The fundamentalists proved something important. Our people are not united by ideology, and as long as we had an external enemy, those differences never truly mattered. However, once that enemy disappears, those differences become the source of division. Give it 200 years. Maybe 300. But eventually those divisions will widen until they become political factions, ideological factions, and eventually civil war. And no amount of good governance will stop it forever. Leo explained as his words left many of those present visibly unsettled. Which is why we need to control both sides of the coin. Leo declared as he raised two fingers into the air, as the statement immediately confused everyone present. What does that even mean? Caleb asked as uncertainty surfaced across his face. It means that rather than allowing the cult to naturally fracture someday in the future, we create the division ourselves and manage it from the very beginning. And to accomplish that, I have already selected the two individuals who will succeed me as the next cult masters. One of them will be Caleb Skyshard. The other will be General Sparrow, who, after leaving planet Phoenix Prime, will publicly reveal himself to the cult under the name Aegon Ver. Leo declared as both Caleb and Ver stared at him in disbelief. Officially, the story presented to the cult will be that I, Cult Master Leo Skyshard, died here on planet Phoenix Prime. Depending on which side of the conflict a citizen belongs to, they will either believe that Caleb Skyshard betrayed me, or that Aegon Ver betrayed me. He continued as both men visibly paled. Father, what? Caleb asked as shock flooded his face. You heard me correctly. Myron, Leonardo and Dumpy will support Caleb's version of events and form the House Skyshard faction. Meanwhile Mickey James, Anderson Silva, and Ver will form the Purist faction. On the surface, the two sides will appear to be political rivals. They will argue, compete, disagree, occasionally even fight. However, because we secretly control both sides, the conflict will never spiral out of control. Every 5 years, representatives from both factions will meet secretly within the Eternal Garden, where I will serve as mediator. And through that arrangement, we will ensure stability within the cult for thousands of years. Leo explained as the more he revealed, the more stunned everyone became. This is my final decision as cult master. I am willing to hear your opinions, but I am not willing to debate the decision itself. He said, as his tone made it clear to everyone that the matter had already been settled. This isn't only about the future of the cult. Frankly speaking, I'm tired. I've spent my entire life chasing strength, fighting wars, and carrying responsibilities that never seem to end. My wife is mortal. My brother is mortal. Many of the people I love are mortal. And if I continue chasing power forever, one day I'll wake up and realize that all of them are gone. Leo admitted after a long pause as the simple confession caught everyone off guard. I have fulfilled the responsibilities that my ancestors left behind. I avenged Soren. I fulfilled the timeless assassin's dream. And I brought the cult back to the peak of the universe. Now I want to spend whatever time I have left with the people I love. I want to be a husband. I want to be a grandfather. And I want to enjoy peace while I still have the opportunity to do so. Leo said, as his voice softened slightly. A wise man once said, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, and I don't want to be one. So if you love and respect me as your leader, then respect my decision and allow me to step away. However, if either of you truly believes you cannot carry this burden, speak now and I will find somebody else to carry this responsibility instead. Leo finished as his gaze shifted toward Caleb and Ver. For several moments, neither man spoke. As although neither of them liked the plan, both of them also respected Leo too much to deny taking on the role. So finally, as the two of them held their tongues, Leo finally let out a deep sigh and said, I understand that the next 2 years will become tumultuous with this internal rift. However, in the long run it will be for the best. As of today, Cult Master Leo Skyshard is dead. While the next generation takes over. Leo declared, as with that he stood up, and gestured for his men to do the same, as he smiled and patted the back of each and every one of them, while they controlled the tears forming in their eyes. A few years after the final war, the Eternal Garden, Leo's POV. Leo sat silently beneath a large tree beside Amanda while lovingly holding her hand, as the two of them watched their grandson Liam lying on his stomach upon the grass a short distance away, completely absorbed in the drawing book opened before him. For once, the Eternal Garden was quiet, as of the 3 grandsons they now had, only Liam was visiting them here today, which kept the sibling squabble to a minimum. What do you think he's drawing this time? Amanda asked softly as she leaned against Leo's shoulder, as although Leo could easily see exactly what he was drawing if he wanted, he still guessed without peeking. Knowing him, Leo muttered while looking lovingly into Amanda's eyes. Probably Aegon Ver or Dumpy wrestling a dragon again. Leo said as Amanda immediately chuckled. Liam was obsessed with Ver and Dumpy and the story of how they took down the Dragon King Multheric, as it was his favorite bedtime tale these days. Well, he does like his dragons. Amanda muttered, as at that very moment, Liam suddenly pushed himself to his feet and began running toward them with his drawing book clutched tightly in both hands, as excitement filled his face while he waved the book above his head. Grandpa, Grandma, look, I made a new drawing today. Liam shouted as he ran across the grass. However, in his excitement, his foot caught against a small root protruding from the ground, as thud. The boy tumbled forward and landed upon the grass with a small yelp, as the drawing book slipped from his hands and several loose pages scattered around him. Off, Amanda muttered, while instinctively rising to go check on him, when Leo gently squeezed her hand and flicked one finger. Relax, I've got this. He muttered, as a soft gust of wind lifted Liam and the fallen pages into the air together, while a faint golden shimmer passed across the scrape forming on the boy's knee and erased it before he could even start crying properly. Huh. Liam blinked in confusion as he floated toward Leo's lap, before looking down at his knee with wide eyes. Grandpa, Liam muttered while touching his knee carefully. How did you do that? Leo smiled faintly as he settled the boy onto his lap and gathered the scattered pages back into a neat stack. How did I do that? Ha 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 ha. I did it because I'm a god. Leo replied as Amanda gave him an amused look from beside him, while Liam frowned while staring at his knee. But it was bleeding, he mumbled. It was. Leo admitted calmly. But now it isn't, he added, as he seemed to think about that for several seconds before looking up at Leo again. If you're a god, do you never get hurt, Grandpa? Liam asked as curiosity slowly replaced the confusion within his eyes, as Leo leaned back against the tree while adjusting the boy comfortably on his lap. I can get hurt, but the damage can never stay unless caused by a very specific metal. So even if damage appears on me, it immediately disappears. Leo replied gently, as Liam looked surprised before asking, so why does it disappear? As Leo chuckled and decided to entertain the question properly, as he placed Liam on the grass beside him and said, because beings like me experience time differently. Leo explained as he picked up one of the loose pages from the drawing book and held it before Liam. Imagine time not as something that only moves forward, but as something that already exists in many places at once. A mortal like you lives in one moment at a time, however someone like me can touch more than one moment. Liam stared at him blankly, while Amanda immediately smiled. You're losing him, she warned softly, as Leo cleared his throat and continued regardless. All right, let me explain it more simply. Leo said as he pointed toward Liam's drawing. Look at this picture. If the little you inside this drawing falls down and hurts his knee, can the real you erase that injury by drawing the knee properly again? He asked, as Liam looked down at the page for a while before nodding slowly. I think so, he said, as Leo smiled and continued. That's similar to what I do. When something happens to my body, I can sometimes correct it by returning that part of myself to a moment before the damage happened. He explained as Liam's brows furrowed. So you don't heal? The boy asked, as Leo wagged his finger and said. To someone watching from outside, it looks like healing. But to me, it feels closer to correcting a mistake in the picture. He said, as Liam stared at the drawing again, his little mind visibly struggling to understand the explanation, as after a while, he pointed toward the stick figure version of himself. So if this me had a mighty sword, could he hurt the real me? Liam asked, as Leo smiled and said, no. Because he's just a drawing. Liam asked. Exactly. Leo replied as his eyes softened. A two-dimensional drawing cannot harm a three-dimensional person, no matter how mighty the sword inside the drawing looks. He explained as Liam nodded seriously. And in the same way, ordinary mortal weapons cannot truly kill beings who exist beyond the same layer of reality as them. Liam's eyes widened with fascination. So then, he muttered while looking up at Leo. Can gods never be killed? At those words, Leo's smile slowly widened. Oh, they can be killed. Leo replied calmly. In fact, your grandfather has killed plenty of them. Liam's mouth fell open. Really? Liam asked as Leo nodded confidently. Really? Leo replied as though it were the most obvious thing in the universe. Your grandfather is the strongest fighter in the universe, you see. He declared, as for one brief moment, Liam stared at him with complete seriousness, before letting out a dismissive snort. Snort. The strongest fighter in the universe is the dragon Aegon Ver. Liam declared with absolute confidence, as Amanda immediately turned her face away and began laughing. Excuse me? Leo asked slowly, his expression dumbfounded, as Liam doubled down and said. All my friends say that the dragon Aegon Ver is the strongest. Liam explained while nodding firmly. They say he can beat anyone, and when I grow up, I'm going to become just like him. For several long seconds, Leo simply stared at his grandson in complete disbelief, while Amanda's laughter only grew louder. Don't laugh, Leo muttered while glancing toward her. I'm not laughing, Amanda replied while very clearly laughing, as Leo looked back helplessly toward Liam, who had already returned to fixing his drawing as though he had not just shattered his grandfather's pride into pieces. I killed like half a dozen gods, you know. Leo muttered, as Liam nodded without looking up. That's nice, Grandpa, but did you kill the Dragon King Multheric? He replied distractedly, as Amanda laughed even harder. Leo opened his mouth as though to defend himself further, before eventually closing it again and simply shaking his head. For a moment, he looked at Amanda laughing beside him. Then at Liam sitting beside his lap while happily drawing Aegon Ver with what appeared to be 6 swords and a crown. And slowly, warmth filled his chest. Because this was why he had retired. For conversations like this. For peaceful afternoons beneath a tree. For the right to be ignored by his own grandson while being told that someone else was cooler than him. As at those thoughts, Leo simply shook his head and began laughing too, as these silly little moments were exactly what made retirement worth it for him. And this and the next one are optional chapters to unlock, and cover the life of various important characters and factions after the final war. You can choose to read or skip it. Dash 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 dash. Part 1: The Fate of the Cult. The first few years following the final battle of Planet Phoenix Prime unfolded almost exactly as Leo had predicted, as although the cult emerged victorious and stood unchallenged across the universe, the death of cult master Leo Skyshard left behind a wound that refused to heal. Officially, the war was over. Officially, the cult had won. Yet beneath the celebrations and declarations of victory, a new conflict quietly began taking shape, as countless rumors spread throughout the rainbow stream regarding the circumstances surrounding Leo's death. Some believed Caleb Skyshard had betrayed his father. Others believed the true culprit was Aegon Ver. And while nobody could agree on what exactly happened during the final moments of the war, almost everyone agreed on one thing. Somebody had to be responsible. Over time, those disagreements evolved into political factions. The hardliners, fundamentalists, and those who believed the cult should remain completely separated from the remnants of the Righteous Alliance gradually gathered beneath Caleb's banner, while the more liberal voices, reformists, and citizens who favored coexistence with conquered populations increasingly found themselves rallying behind Aegon Ver. Thus, the House Skyshard faction and the Purist faction were born. To the average citizen, the divide appeared completely genuine. The political disputes were real. The ideological disagreements were real. The public hostility was real. Yet behind closed doors, Caleb and Ver remained trusted allies, as both men understood that they were not participating in a power struggle, but rather carrying out the final responsibility entrusted to them by Leo. However, while the political landscape shifted internally, the cult's external expansion continued almost unhindered, as the collapse of the Great Clan Alliance left no force capable of resisting them. Planet after planet submitted to cult rule, while one military campaign followed another, until within a decade following the final war, almost every inhabited world within the Rainbow Stream had been absorbed into the Empire. Only a handful of neutral planets were intentionally spared, with those worlds serving as trade hubs, diplomatic centers, and safe havens for the few surviving Righteous Alliance citizens who refused to live beneath the cult's banner. As for the first time in recorded history, a single power stood dominant across almost the entire universe. Yet despite living within the same empire, the two factions never stopped blaming one another for Leo's death. Interestingly, however, the hatred rarely extended toward ordinary citizens. Families remained connected across faction lines. Businesses continued operating together. Friendships endured. Many even married across faction boundaries. Instead, the anger remained focused almost entirely upon the leadership figures each side viewed as traitors, as generation after generation grew up hearing stories about the betrayal of Leo's Skyshard and the men responsible for it. And in a strange twist of fate, that shared outrage became the very thing that united the cult. Exactly as Leo had predicted centuries earlier. Because while the citizens argued endlessly about who had betrayed their beloved cult master, they remained united in their desire to defend his legacy, preserving a common cause that prevented ideological differences from growing into something far more dangerous. Neither side ever gained overwhelming dominance, as military, economy and political influence all remained carefully balanced. As whenever one faction appeared to be pulling too far ahead, circumstances somehow always emerged that restored equilibrium once more. And so, as the decades turned into centuries and the centuries turned into millennia, Leo's final plan quietly proved itself successful. The cult never collapsed beneath the weight of its own success. The ideological divide never evolved into civil war. And despite appearing fractured from the outside, the Empire remained stronger than ever before, as the two factions spent eternity competing against one another while unknowingly preserving the very unity they believed they were fighting over. Part 2: The House Skyshard Faction. The future turned out to be remarkably kind to Caleb, Myron, and Leonardo, as despite carrying the enormous burden of maintaining one half of Leo's carefully constructed empire, all three men eventually found a balance between duty, family, and personal fulfillment. For Caleb and Myron, the centuries following the final war became an age of steady growth. The brothers matured as leaders. They matured as fathers. And they matured as warriors. While neither ever stopped carrying the weight of the House Skyshard faction upon their shoulders, they gradually learned how to live for something beyond endless conflict, as unlike their father before them, they inherited a universe that was already at peace. Roughly 3 centuries after the final war, both brothers successfully crossed the final threshold and ascended into godhood, becoming only the second generation of the Skyshard family to achieve such a feat. The achievement sent shockwaves throughout the Rainbow Stream. After all, it was already rare for a single family to produce one god. While producing 3 within the span of a few centuries was something that many historians believed should have been impossible. As for the first time since the era of the Timeless Assassin, multiple members of the same family stood amongst the strongest beings in existence simultaneously. Yet despite possessing power that could shake entire worlds, both brothers remained surprisingly grounded. Caleb continued leading the House Skyshard faction with Sophia by his side, as together they guided their people through centuries of prosperity while raising another child, a daughter who quickly became the pride of the household. Meanwhile, Myron eventually found a family of his own. After spending most of his early life consumed by cultivation, warfare, and impossible expectations, he finally discovered a happiness that had nothing to do with strength. He married. He became a father. And before long, he found himself experiencing a different kind of responsibility altogether, as raising 2 children often proved more challenging than fighting gods ever had. Yet, despite their personal lives flourishing, neither brother ever abandoned their duties. For centuries, both continued searching for traces of Dutrask. As although the fugitive god disappeared completely following the collapse of the Great Clan Alliance, neither Caleb nor Myron ever accepted the possibility that he was truly gone. Search expeditions were launched. Intelligence networks remained active. Entire sectors of space were quietly investigated. And yet, despite all their efforts, Dutrask remained one of the universe's greatest unsolved mysteries. As for Leonardo, his future unfolded along a very different path. A century following the final war, he eventually abandoned the damaged body that had caused him so much suffering and permanently inherited Terence's body instead, which had been preserved specifically for that purpose. The transition restored his health completely and granted him something he had not possessed for a very long time. A future. Although he never managed to ascend into godhood, he still became one of the strongest demigods in existence, with few individuals throughout the rainbow stream capable of matching his strength. Yet unlike Caleb and Myron, Leonardo gradually lost interest in politics, administration, and public recognition. The endless responsibilities that accompanied leadership simply no longer appealed to him, as eventually, he withdrew from public life almost entirely and settled upon planet Granada, transforming the once infamous world into his personal sanctuary. There, much to everyone's surprise, the former warrior developed an unusual passion. Botany. The same man who had once spent centuries mastering the art of killing gradually became obsessed with cultivating life instead, as he devoted himself to studying Granada's unique ecosystem and the rare aquatic plants that could only survive within its waters. What began as a simple hobby eventually evolved into a lifelong pursuit. Year after year, Leonardo expanded his gardens. New species were discovered, ancient species were preserved, entire ecosystems were carefully cultivated beneath his supervision, as over time, the divine waters of Granada became a forest of water plants that Leonardo had caringly grown. Part 3. The rest of the Skyshard family. While the cult expanded across the rainbow stream and reshaped the political landscape of the universe, Leo quietly devoted himself to something far more important than conquest. His family. After spending most of his life chasing strength, fighting wars, carrying the burden of leadership, and sacrificing countless personal moments for the sake of the cult, he finally found himself in possession of something he had rarely been allowed to enjoy. Time. And unlike before, he intended to spend that time wisely. The centuries that followed became some of the happiest years of Leo's existence, as for the first time since becoming cult master, he no longer measured his life through battlefields, cultivation breakthroughs, political struggles, or the rise and fall of enemies. Instead, he measured it through family gatherings, quiet evenings, celebrations, grandchildren, and the countless ordinary moments that most people overlooked but which he had spent an entire lifetime fighting to protect. He spent long afternoons sitting beside Amanda beneath the trees of the Eternal Garden while the two watched their grandchildren play across the fields before them. He spent evenings with Luke, sharing drinks and conversations that often drifted between fond memories, pointless arguments, and stories about a world that had changed beyond recognition. He spent years surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, watching generation after generation of the Skyshard family grow up in a peaceful universe that no longer needed heroes to save it. As for perhaps the first time in his entire life, Leo simply allowed himself to be happy. Unfortunately, however, even gods could not protect mortals from the passage of time. The years continued moving forward, while the people around him gradually grew older, and despite possessing power capable of shaking the universe itself, there ultimately came a day when Leo was forced to confront the one enemy he could never truly defeat. Amanda, Luke, and Alia eventually reached the end of their mortal lives. Amanda was the first to leave him behind after centuries spent by his side, having shared every stage of his journey from the uncertain days of his youth to the peaceful era that followed the final war. Luke followed years later, leaving behind a silence that felt strangely unnatural, as despite all their arguments, disagreements, and occasional fights throughout the centuries, Leo had never truly imagined a universe where his brother was no longer somewhere nearby. Alia remained the longest, yet eventually, even she reached the end of her journey, as by the time she'd passed away, Leo finally came to understand that there were some victories that strength alone could never achieve. Because no matter how powerful he became, no matter how many gods he defeated, and no matter how deeply he understood the laws of time, he could never stop the people he loved from eventually reaching the end of their natural lives. Yet unlike many gods before him, Leo refused to simply accept their absence. After spending centuries studying the remnants of the timeless assassin's legacy, he eventually succeeded in deciphering one of its greatest mysteries. The projection technology. The same technology that had allowed the timeless assassin to leave behind a perfect echo of himself long after his death. Once Leo finally understood how it worked, he immediately began adapting the design for his own purposes. Not for war or legacy, but for family, as using that knowledge, he constructed what eventually became known as the Skyshard Hall. Rather than burying Amanda, Luke, and Alia beneath silent gravestones, he preserved perfect projection copies of them at the peak of their lives, ensuring that their personalities, memories, mannerisms, and speech patterns would remain intact forever. Whenever he visited the hall, Amanda could greet him with the same warm smile she always wore. Luke could challenge him to arguments he had already lost 100 times before, while Alia could laugh at his expense while pretending she was not taking sides. The conversations felt so natural that, over time, Leo stopped thinking of the hall as a memorial at all. Instead, it simply became the place where he went whenever he missed them. Some days he would spend hours there. Other days he would sit in silence and simply listen. And although he understood better than anyone that the projections were not truly Amanda, Luke, and Alia, they still carried enough of the people he loved to make eternity feel a little less empty. Because for Leo, the Skyshard Hall was never about denying death. It was about preserving memory. It was about making sure that the people who shaped his life would never slowly fade away beneath the weight of endless centuries. And so, while time eventually claimed Amanda, Luke, and Alia, Leo ensured that their laughter, their voices, and the essence of who they were would remain with him forever. As long after the wars ended, long after the cult conquered the Rainbow Stream, and long after history moved on from the Age of Legends, Leo could still return to the hall, sit beside the people he loved most, and spend an afternoon with his family. As in the end, that was enough for him. Part 4: The Purist Faction and the Beast King. While Caleb and Myron guided the House Skyshard faction into the future, Aegon Vare found himself carrying an equally important responsibility on the opposite side of the divide. Following the final war, Vare finally revealed his true identity to the wider cult, stepping out from the shadows and publicly embracing the fact that General Sparrow and Aegon Vare had been one and the same all along. For many citizens within the Purist faction, Aegon Vare was more than a leader. He was a symbol, a living reminder that loyalty, sacrifice, and perseverance could still prevail even after the universe itself had been reshaped by war. And as the centuries passed, his reputation only continued to grow. Where Caleb's faction gradually attracted traditionalists and hardliners, Vare's faction became increasingly tolerant and outward-looking, encouraging cooperation between conquered populations and cult citizens while promoting stability throughout the territories under its control. Under his leadership, countless worlds prospered. Trade flourished, cultural exchanges expanded, and many former enemies eventually found themselves living peacefully beneath the cult's banner. Yet despite becoming one of the most influential figures in existence, Vare never forgot the responsibility that Leo had entrusted to him. He trained relentlessly. He cultivated endlessly. And roughly 2 centuries after the final war, he finally crossed the final threshold and ascended into godhood. The achievement immediately elevated him into the highest echelon of existence, while simultaneously creating the balance that Leo had always intended. Because unlike Caleb and Myron, who inherited power through blood and family ties, Vare represented something else entirely. A counterweight, a safeguard, a reminder that no individual should ever possess unchecked authority. And so, while Leo spent his retirement enjoying the peace he had fought so hard to create, Vare quietly stood watch over the universe, holding the timeless assassin's origin daggers and ensuring that should Leo ever lose his way, there would still exist someone capable of standing against him. Fortunately, that day never came. At the same time, another old friend found himself unexpectedly elevated into a position of authority. As Dumpy, following Multhorak's death, actually transcended to become the Beast King. What began as little more than a battlefield declaration eventually transformed into an institution recognized throughout the Rainbow Stream, as countless intelligent beast races rallied beneath Dumpy's banner and willingly accepted his leadership. Although his territory remained comparatively small when measured against the vast holdings of the cult, the planets under his control quickly became some of the most fiercely independent worlds in existence. The cult rarely interfered, the factions rarely questioned him, and Leo himself was more than happy to leave the Beast King's affairs alone. As a result, Dumpy ruled with almost complete autonomy. Over the centuries, he transformed his territory into a thriving dominion where beast races could flourish without outside interference, while simultaneously raising generations of warriors who looked toward him with the same admiration that cult citizens reserved for their own heroes. And while many rulers spent their lives chasing greatness, Dumpy achieved something far simpler. He became exactly what he had always wanted to be. The strongest frog in the universe who had made his Lord Father proud. Part 5: The Shadows and the Last Great Clan. While the cult publicly appeared divided between the House Skyshard and Purist factions, there remained one final force quietly operating beyond the view of ordinary citizens. The Shadows. The organization originally established by Chaosbringer survived the final war almost completely intact, as despite losing Leo's support as official cult master, the agents still operated with peak efficiency. For while Caleb and Ver managed the visible conflict between their respective factions, the Shadows managed everything that existed beneath the surface. Their agents infiltrated both sides, their informants spread across every major planet, while intelligence networks monitored political movements, tracked emerging threats, and quietly ensured that neither faction ever drifted too far from the path Leo had designed for them. When tensions began cooling too much, the Shadows subtly reignited old grievances. And when hatred threatened to spiral into genuine violence, the Shadows quietly suppressed it before it could spread. Information was carefully regulated, public sentiment was subtly manipulated. And through thousands of small interventions scattered across centuries, they maintained the delicate balance that kept the cult united. Most citizens never realized they existed. Most local leaders never realized how much influence they possessed. Yet behind almost every major political development, there was usually a shadow somewhere in the background gently nudging events back toward equilibrium. In many ways, they became the invisible foundation supporting Leo's final plan. The balancers, the mediators, the unseen custodians of an empire that had grown too large to govern through strength alone. And while the universe gradually adjusted to cult rule, the final surviving great clan eventually faced a choice that could no longer be avoided. Unlike the other great clans, the Su clan had somehow survived the rise of the cult without losing its identity completely, largely due to Su Tang's leadership and his willingness to adapt whenever circumstances demanded it. However, by the time Su Tang finally stepped down as patriarch, the political reality of the universe had already become impossible to ignore. The cult controlled nearly everything. Resistance no longer served any meaningful purpose. And continuing to stand alone would eventually guarantee the clan's extinction, which was why, the moment Su Yong stepped up as the next leader, he immediately made the difficult decision to bend the knee. Officially, the Su territories joined the House Skyshard faction and became one of its serving clans, accepting cult authority while retaining a significant degree of administrative independence. Many within the clan initially viewed the decision as surrender. Others viewed it as pragmatism. Yet history would eventually prove Su Yong correct. Because while countless other great clans vanished into history, the Su clan endured. Its traditions survived. Its culture survived. Its identity survived. And over time, the relationship between the Su clan and the cult evolved into something resembling mutual respect rather than subservience. As for Su Yong himself, although he never managed to reach the same heights as legends such as Leo Skyshard, Caleb Skyshard, Myron Skyshard, or Aegon Ver, he still achieved something many considered equally admirable. He became a capable leader, a respected patriarch, and eventually, a demigod. More importantly, he succeeded in preserving everything his ancestors had entrusted to him, as in the end the Su clan, its culture and its people all survived the fallout of the final war. And so, as the millennia continued passing and the rainbow stream settled into an era of unprecedented stability, every major figure who survived the final war eventually found their place within the new world that followed. Some became rulers, some became legends, some became guardians working from the shadows, while some simply found peace. Yet regardless of the path they chose, all of them ultimately lived within a universe shaped by the same man. A retired cult master who spent his days in the Eternal Garden, quietly watching over the future he had sacrificed everything to create. Leo's Pa, 500 years after the final war. After enjoying retired life for roughly 500 years straight, Leo finally decided that it was time for him to make the final leap, as after spending half a millennium watching over the universe from afar, he felt that there was nothing left tying him down anymore. My children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren are all grown up now. They don't need me anymore, so I guess it's finally time for me to move on. Leo muttered as he stood atop the cliffs of the Eternal Garden overlooking the endless ocean below, while the gentle breeze brushed against his face. Over the last 500 years, he had watched the cult flourish. He had watched Caleb and Myron grow into capable leaders. He had watched Aegon Ver and Dumpy become legends in their own right. And most importantly, he had spent more time with his family than he ever thought would be possible when he was younger. As while there were still many things left for him to discover, there was no longer anything left for him to protect. And hence, after centuries of peace, Leo finally decided that it was time to resume chasing the one thing he had abandoned long ago. A realm beyond godhood. However, just as that thought settled within his mind, he felt a familiar presence appear behind him. A presence that he had not sensed for over 500 years. It's been a while since I last saw you, Leo Skyshard. Lady Destiny said as she emerged from the empty air behind him, as Leo turned slowly to face her. It has indeed been a while, Lady Destiny. He replied, as for a while neither of them spoke after exchanging that greeting, as instead they quietly checked the other out. Until eventually, it was Lady Destiny who broke the silence. You had everything a man could ever dream of. The power to rule the entire cosmos unchallenged. The ability to shape civilizations according to your will. And yet you chose to step away from it all and remain absent from the universal stage for 500 years. Why? She asked as genuine curiosity surfaced within her eyes. Why? Leo repeated before letting out a slow breath. Because I understood that the cycle of history could never be broken unless I chose a different path from those who came before me. Multheric wanted to become the king of the cosmos, while the timeless assassin became so focused on changing the universe that he failed to properly cherish the people closest to him. Both of them had opportunities to break the wheel of history and usher in a better age, yet both ultimately failed. So I learned from them and chose not to repeat their mistakes. I never allowed myself to become jealous of the next generation. And I never allowed myself to become consumed by the pursuit of power. My goals were clear from the very beginning and I never deviated from them. Restore the cult. Avenge Soren. Create a future where my family could live in peace. And once those goals were accomplished, I stepped aside. Leo explained as his gaze drifted toward the horizon. Destiny listened quietly before nodding in appreciation. That is quite admirable, Leo Skyshard, because by ushering the universe into a new golden age and spending the last 500 years without accumulating further negative karma, you have finally become karma neutral. She said as Leo looked mildly surprised by that revelation. Karma neutral? He asked, yes. Destiny replied. You have paid every debt, balanced every scale, and resolved every thread of cause and effect that once bound you. You are no longer shackled by karma. Leo remained silent as he processed that information. However, before he could respond, Destiny continued. To add to that, you have also fulfilled your destiny as the second coming of the timeless assassin, which means that the destiny thread that followed you throughout your life has finally reached its conclusion. So for the first time since your birth, your future is completely your own. At those words, Leo's interest visibly sharpened. And what exactly does that mean? He asked, as Destiny smiled and continued. It means that you now possess a rare opportunity. The opportunity to become something greater than a god. Destiny replied, as Leo immediately raised an eyebrow. Greater than a god? He asked again, yes, you now possess the qualifications necessary to become the Third Eternal. Destiny replied. The Third Eternal? Leo repeated as Destiny nodded. The Lord of the Void. The Master of the Fourth Dimension and the Guide of Lost Souls. She explained, as for several moments, Leo remained silent while contemplating those words, until eventually, he looked toward Destiny and asked the obvious question. Is this predetermined, or do I actually have a say in the matter? As Destiny chuckled softly listening to his words. It has been preordained that the Third Eternal would become the Lord of the Void. However, the individual who would eventually inherit that position was never fixed. And after everything you have accomplished, the flow of time has chosen you as the most suitable candidate. She explained as Leo frowned, for the answer she gave only left him behind with even more questions. Preordained by who? He asked, as at those words, Destiny smiled. When the origin god died, he split into 12 eternal fragments. Karma, Destiny, Void, and many others. Those fragments became the foundations upon which reality itself was built. She explained calmly. Currently, we exist within the third cycle. The cycle of Void. And since you have successfully completed that cycle, you have earned the right to become the Lord of the Void. Leo stared at her for several moments. The third cycle. The origin god. What are you even talking about? He asked as the more she explained, the less he felt he understood. However, at that question, Destiny simply smiled a knowing smile as she said. Oh, sweet summer child, there's still so much left for you to learn. 4x. That's it from my side, folks. That concludes Timeless Assassin's final volume. Thank you all for being a part of this journey and reading this book till the very last page. I love you all, and to immortalize those who contributed the most to this journey, I'm adding the names of the top 10 fans below as a Hall of Fame. So a special thanks to patrons. Bookworm 0711, Highlander Charles, Liljay 439, Echo 966, Buckley, Cervantes 91, Checking 137, Sunny Bunny, Stanley Kahn, and Teo Swig. Because without your support, this would not have been possible. XXXXX. The Timeless Assassin will return for a side story, sometime in the future. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.